Nice.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Neuro, also Brunt, and this is the story of our guild. Once upon a time, there was a game called StarCraft 2, and many a sweaty gamer played it. But there was a sweaty game in the archives, in some old hard drive in Irving, California, or Irvine, whatever. And they resurrected a game called Vanilla WoW. A bunch of us decided to roll together. And this is our story of that experience. I'm joined by Lathspill, the Locksmith, Rogue, also Apoptosis808 on Twitch, full-time streamer, hitting the big time. Tucon, the Troll Hunter, one of the meanest, highest parsing hunters in the whole world. And he's our raid leader, killing KT and shit. Pretty cool. This is Brent, main tank. Since the very start of all this, RFC, no, even before that, the group quests in the Torrent starting area. Who's that next to him? That's Braun. Braun is my brother, and being able to play this game with your sibling is one of the coolest things ever. He started off with shit gear and then ended up with something really nice at the end. Maybe you'll see later. Then we've got Kagran, one of the most amazing forces of Canadian energy I've ever witnessed in my entire life. He's a zoomer, but he has the perception, wisdom, and patience of a boomer sometimes. I didn't mean that as an insult. That's a compliment, I think. You're a zoomer? Are you not?
I'm 26. I think I'm a millennial. I think that counts.
Super.
I mean, I definitely think that sounded insultish,
Kagran, you're great.
but we know.
And then Youngji and Ragnarokette are in the group as well. Some of our esteemed mages. And today we're going to set off and walk from here, Ogremar, to Thunderbluff, one of the other gorgeous starting areas in Classic WoW. I forgot Patara. Wait, where is Patara?
I'm on the other side of the giant Torrens.
Oh,
Brunt, do you have movement speed on your boots?
Yeah, why are you so slow?
wait, what?
What are you doing? I took my shoes off. And
I
you're
do have
still
move
way
speed on my
slower
boots.
Than me. Why are you? Exceeding.
You're actually slower.
You're so slow, right? I'm literally back.
Look, I have
move
move speed to boots.
You know,
What is
Duncan,
happening?
No.
Give
I
this man
don't
an
have
aspect
move
of the
speed to
pack.
boots.
Give this
You
man an
have
aspect of the pack.
super slow going on.
Okay.
It doesn't work. RP locks your movement speed in, but yours is slower.
I'm
Brunt
just
is
that
stuck.
badass.
Oh my god, this is gonna be very. Can you mount up?
Let me see.
I don't
Jeez
think
Louise.
it changes it.
Okay.
Yes, that's the
There.
speed.
Okay. All right. Let's fan back out, boys. Let's
Okay.
get this correct again.
And we are also joined by Patara, the undead warlock. Patara has done a roster for us. He stepped up as an officer in the later phases of the game. It's been an absolute boss. Roster is a huge pain in the butt. Either you're stressed out because you have too few people, or you're overwhelmed because you have too many. And I wanted to talk about like the game overall and how we all feel about it, because we've gone from the grassy lands of Mulgore and shit to beating the game, killing the last bosses. Did you feel like Classic was better or worse than you thought?
It was great. I think
It was
so.
way better.
I had no
never got to
expectations going in.
experience it. I never got to experience it past level like 42, so everything was pretty much brand new.
What did we start there? Did you play in vanilla? Who played in vanilla? Like Braun, did you play?
I played, but I didn't have a max level character in vanilla. I watched Brunt's Night Elf Warrior.
Okay. What about you, Braun?
I had Deltarius, the Night Elf Warrior, and he got a...
Deltarius?
Yeah, do you like the name?
That's pretty sweet. Very, very D&D.
Well, I changed it after I used to be just a copied name from Tolkien stuff. So Deltarius was the second name of the character, but I got hard capped at level 45 because our computer at home that we had upstairs would like hard lock and freeze in a zone that had too many characters in it. So I just got to a point where there were too many enemies and I couldn't load anymore. So I worked as a lifeguard for a couple summers and got enough money to buy a laptop. And with the laptop, I could play WoW again. And then I went to university early and there was a guy, Dion is his IRL name, but he was someone who actually raided in vanilla on a paladin. He just spammed decursive, but he ended up being my sensei for WoW, and he said, well, if you want to tank as a warrior, you need to get your adamantium breastplate, and it's this quest that starts here, and you have to do this and this. So I ended up getting geared up to be able to off-tank stuff. I tanked ZG, AQ20, and our guild got stuck in AQ40 on the trash. I joined pretty late in terms of rating, so I didn't really see MC, didn't see Blackwing Lair, and then we got stuck on the Anubisath Defenders. Just couldn't beat those with the Thunderclap and Shadowbolt Volley and Plague and all that, and everyone's laggy computers. Made 1 or 2 PvP videos on my warrior after they did the pre-patch thing, which is about to hit on Tuesday, and everyone got to have super amazing weapons even if they didn't grind the rank out.
What was your favorite Breaking Benjamin song to put over those videos?
I was actually into Demon Hunter at the time and Rob Zombie. But yeah, Breaking Benjamin is good too for that kind of retro content. But I distinctly remember getting made fun of in one of my ZG raids for clicking my abilities. I was clicking Heroic Strike. I distinctly remember doing that because that's an ability you use a whole bunch. And I probably had some stuff bound to like 1 through 5 or whatever, as a lot of classic gamers did. But I was in Ventrilo doing this, and they were like, dude, are you clicking your stuff? Well, you're a total noob, dude. And that set me on the path of like hotkey optimization, which ended up paying off a bunch in BC. But I would say that I didn't really get to see the breadth of this game initially. I got to 60, I tanked some stuff, but being able to tank it again as a warrior allowed me to hit it as an adult.
Nice. Kagran, did you play?
No. I started late TBC, playing a hunter, and mainly played in Wrath. It was my main history with classic-ish WoW.
Right. I played a gnome warlock named Boncher all the way to 60. My uncle paid for my account because I was just a little kid. And I played on equally similar experience to Brent, where my computer wouldn't let me like go into certain areas. So I think I was around maybe high 40s for a really long time, and I just sat in Tanaris. And I remember I would go around and I'd kill the pirates, and I'd make like Noggin Fogger elixir. I spent so much time in that zone because I couldn't actually go into Gadget Zan to take a flight path anywhere because my computer would freeze. I learned some tricks on how to get around that by scrolling your camera in all the way and looking at the floor and just looking at your mini map to like navigate around places. People used to do that in like EverQuest and stuff when everyone's computer sucked. And I pretty much haven't stopped playing since then. My uncle Charlie paid for my account for like years and years because that's how we kind of connected and still played with each other. He still plays to this day actually as well, but I think he plays just like pretty casually, just retail and things like that. And my cousin, his son, is actually in our guild as well. I think is going to be running with Patara and Tunkan and Kagran when the TBC launches. So that's kind of a really cool, almost full circle kind of thing. But yeah, that's pretty much. I still have that original Warlock on my retail account, just different names. I've transferred him to different servers, transferred his name, transferred his faction multiple times. But he still remains that same Warlock that I made in vanilla.
Yeah, I still have my original Warlock, but it is now Alliance because at the end of Mists of Pandaria, I started playing Alliance and has some stuff that you can't really get anymore, which is kind of funny. But I got to like low 40s, mid 40s. I remember probably one of the last things I did before TBC came out was doing stuff in Badlands and soloing one of the elite quests there because I was a Warlock. But yeah, I never reached max level, and I PvP'd a lot and thought I was great at it, and I was terrible, like everybody else was.
Yeah. Tunkin, did you play vanilla?
Not at all. My cousins started playing in late TBC, and I got introduced to the game by just watching them on their computer whenever I went over to their house, like once every other month. And I think I watched them play until for Christmas, because I'd been begging my parents like to let me play, because like, hey, my cousin's playing, it's super cool. Like one of my cousins, he had like full Ulduar, like a fully geared out Ulduar Paladin. And so I begged and begged, and for Christmas I got Wrath of the Lich King, and I think I leveled a Paladin up to maybe 40 or 50. Cataclysm came out. I maxed it out, and the rest is kind of history. I've been playing on and off, but I kind of found out about private servers before Classic came out, and I leveled up a Hunter to mid 50s, but I couldn't finish it off. I kind of burned out. So when I heard that Classic WoW was releasing, I was like, I've got to do it. Got to play 100 to 60, and I want to do all the raids. That was my only goal coming in. And I think a lot of you guys came in from knowing Neuro, but I didn't know Neuro at all. But coming in here and going, I think it was like level 15, level 17. In the Barrens, there's the Northwatch Hold. Partied up with Brunt to get that whole quest done on the inside, and we watched as some people, like some other warriors, were like trying to speed ahead, and we were just standing there chilling. And we finished the quest, and he invited me to the guild.
We did the escort quest together?
Mm-hmm. Escort quest.
Oh.
And we also did the ones where you have to go up into the towers and kill the dudes. And I remember we were trying to tag for it for like 15 minutes because there were people up there and just trying to compete for tags. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I was trying to start my own guild with some friends from that I had played with in Wrath, and most of them burnt out mid-20s. And so then I was basically playing alone, and I had been watching Brunt and Lath and Braun and all them do Black Fathom Depths, I think it was. And
Black Fathom
I think I
Deeps.
sent him Black Fathom Deeps, and I sent him an in-game mail. And then about a week later, I was like, all right, my friends aren't coming back. I was like mid-40s, and he was like, yeah, I'm just inviting anybody that like wants to join. So I just was like, well, there's a lot of people in this guild, and it seems pretty chill. So I joined then and just kept playing.
Yeah, I joined probably the latest out of the gang. I had already reached 60 on my own after playing with some IRL friends who fell off the game sooner than I did, but I wanted to continue because I just enjoy gaming and raiding. And after a unsuccessful raid with a guild that I had joined with while leveling, I wanted to find a pug that could actually clear the first boss in MC. Shocker, I know. And ended up joining one of the creation pugs in late 2019. One of the MCs near the holidays when not everyone could make it, so they needed a pug. And joined up. Patara gave me a bunch of shit for what I was doing in raid, doing more DPS than him mainly.
Yeah, okay.
And
more like Emily on the boss.
Joined from there.
Details.
Joined the guild, raided with them ever since.
Yeah, so that kind of links up with what the guild was envisioned to be. The original working title of the guild was Anti-Venom, and it's kind of a response to what my overall mission is on Twitch of fighting toxic behavior and emphasizing respect. So whenever people ask about what creation is, I say it's a respect first guild. And the reason I switched the name to creation is Anti-Venom. It does sound a little bit more kind of angsty teenage edgelord. And creation also highlights that we have content creators in the guild. We have people who stream. Patara, you stream. Kagran streams. Ragnarokette here is with us. She streams. Last Spell streams. And just making content and just being a community person who does stuff in a way that is fun and respectful and chill and all that. And also, I really wanted to make sure this guild wasn't focused around my stream as the primary thing. I wanted to be a good leader and main tank first, because you have a lot of huge WoW streamers who are constantly talking to their chat and they're not really paying attention to the raids, and they kind of let other people run the show and that kind of thing. I didn't want to go that route. It probably would have been better from a money standpoint to do that, but the game is so cool and interesting, and you do have 39 other people's real time that's on the line, and they have one opportunity to play this game, and it's like reincarnated form, and you want to make that really good. And I think we, by the end of it, did a pretty good job.
I'd say so. You say you were the main tank, but you weren't always thinking to be the main tank, right? Or were you going to play something else? I think
I was
originally.
gonna play a druid, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a little weird.
Yeah. It was a question from Ragnarok Head, actually. She said, oh, or not a question, more of a statement. Oh, come on, you know you want a main tank for your guild. And I was like, yeah, you're right, actually. Let's do that. And I really like main tanking. That's a interesting sort of role, especially with the scale of 40 people and how it's the highest activity role for like the number of abilities you have to use. You're involved with the boss longer than everybody else because you have to start the fight. And it's a lot of pressure, and you wipe the raid quite a few times, and that's a humbling thing. I guess the social dynamics of playing Classic WoW are really interesting, and we can kind of get into this through the conversation, but just knowing that your mistakes impact other people's experience in the game to the scale of 40 people is pretty wild. Like, the feeling that you get when you wipe a raid. I don't know if people have tried to describe that, but I know that I've wiped us quite a few times, and that helps me to practice patience and compassion when other people make mistakes too. Because it's like, if I'm shitty to you when you make a mistake and we wipe, then that gives you the green light to do the same to me, and it just ends up creating a really bad environment for everybody. So the analogy that I used for describing how I wanted this guild to be, describing it to people, was I had hoped that Creation would have the best barbecue. Out of all the guilds on the server, we're not going to beat donkeys for clear time. We're not trying to. Our raid composition is really balanced for each class. We didn't really min-max, like, okay, we're going to bring 20 warriors. We wanted to have people who enjoyed hanging out with each other and people who are going to be consistently good to each other, so that when you log into the game on Saturday for our main raid, and you jump into chat, and you're jumping in a chat with people you like and people you like hanging out with. And then you're doing the raid with people you enjoy hanging out with. And that's the point, is that we're here to hang out with each other. Because that's maybe the biggest contrast from this and StarCraft, is just the sheer number of people involved. And with BC, that's going to change. So
A little bit.
25. So we had the level rush. A lot of us
Oh yeah.
went mega fast up to 60. I think I was our first warrior. Braun was no doubt our first. Actually, was it you or Winter? Did Winter join at that point?
I don't think Winter was in yet at that. No, he wasn't. I remember
At what
I
point?
think
specifically.
he was post first red kill, I'm pretty sure.
He was not. He was before.
Really?
Where I mean, skipping ahead just a tiny bit, but I have the logs of the first. Our first logs does have Winter in there as a Feral Druid. So,
Do you have our
okay.
first MC right now?
not first, but I think we
One of
were
the
talking about
first.
this a little bit earlier. But it looks like some people do have a bit of gear, but nothing a lot. So this is the first like recorded log that we have, and yeah, Winter is a part of that group of people.
I remember, I think Winter was actually in my stream. I was streaming World of Warcraft. We were already 60. And I think I was doing something with you, Brunt. And he said, "Oh, are you in Neuro's guild?" I went, "Yeah. Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, can you invite me?" It's like, okay. Yeah, dude, sure. Just jump on and do all that, and was one of the crucial members throughout the history of creation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to look over logs, or do we have something else we want to say first?
Yeah,
You always-
well, I was thinking we can use the logs as a data set where we can see like who was in the guild and the contributions they
Okay.
made and stuff. Because
I did want to say though that one of the things that at least early on before we did start raiding, and we were running a lot of 5-mans, and it was very interesting watching Brunt learn patience as a tank, because as a warrior you don't have mana and you're like raring to go, I got my rage, let's go to the next pull. And I remember we were in a Strathholm and we were doing the dead side and we were working our way through, and we have a dead person most likely me. I'm pretty sure it was me most of the time. And Butters, and it was full casters and Brunt. And Butters is almost out of mana, rezzing me, and Brunt's already onto the next pull as we're all like, hey, like, we're not even prepared. And we wiped so many times going through that while it was fun and stuff. But, it became a meme that Brunt pulls really fast and everything like that, when everybody's not prepared. Then ready checks became a thing. But it's been interesting watching the pace of Brunt going from let's go really fast to okay, let's make sure everybody's prepared, and now everybody's already prepared and we're like, go. So it's been a flip flop. But I had a lot of fun in 5-mans pre MC, even though we were dying a lot just because of everybody learning how each class functions and having the patience to not run ahead.
That's a really good point. Actually, before we get into the full raid logs, is the experience of going through the dungeons in Classic before you're geared is pretty fun. Like, quite a few of the dungeons do have some tricky boss fights, some twists and turns, and some of them look really cool as well. SM was one that we really just zoomed through and would grind the lowest one until we were high enough level to hit library, and then we would hit library graveyard back to back, and then hit armory after that, and then we would hit armory and cathedral back to back, and just over and over again. The dungeons are quite fun, and I think dungeon leveling has a lot more of that like social interaction than just questing on your own. So if you're with a good group, it's really, really fun. My favorite dungeon is probably BRD. That was a turning point for Brunt because I leveled up his two-handed arms to just be able to cleave stuff down, do quests on my own, and it's not that hard to hold aggro if you deal top damage. And we had Broken Helix in the group, so he was given Wind Fury Totem too, which is even better. But then once we hit BRD, the dungeon is so vast that the starting mobs are like 49 to 50, and the last boss I think is 59 or something. So he was red to us when we first stepped in there at 53, and I spec'd Deep Prot so that I could tank him. And that was also to kind of get some practice for tanking at level 60 in the raid. But yeah, dungeons like BRD, I feel like they don't make them like that anymore. It's just so huge and tangled, and there's no map for how to navigate it. You can't just hit M and then see where you want to go next. You have to kind of get a feel for the lay of the place and then navigate your own way through.
Even with a map, that place's map is terrible. It literally doesn't show you if that's a corridor that leads to another area. It's awful. It's just so big. You have to know where you're going, and even then, you still get lost.
To kind of piggyback a little bit on what you said, Brent, I think I agree with that. Like, my favorite gear acquisition, I think, in all of the game was farming Prebis. Like, doing 5-man dungeons on the fly, trying to grind specific bosses so that we could, oh, am I going to get True Strike Shoulders, or maybe Hand of Justice is going to drop this time, or whatever. That was just like a really exciting phase of the game. Raids have been amazing and fun, and we'll get into all that for sure. But like, I don't know why, but the Prebis was like such a really awesome time.
Right? I mean, it's something you can farm instead of having to wait once a week to hopefully get something. And it's a smaller, tight-knit crew, and everything is like, oh, that could be useful.
Yeah, and I think it's
So-
like the first time that you get gear that's like, this is the best that I can get right now, and like you're upgrading maybe that green that you've had since level 40 or something like that.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
it's like, oh, I'm getting a blue.
it's
Whoa.
like one of those things like how people really enjoy the start of Diablo 3 seasons or PoE seasons or things like that because you have nothing and you get to get everything again. And I
You
think
get
that was like
excited over
a
gray
big,
shoulders.
yeah, I think that's a big allure with like vanilla coming back was like, oh, I can re-experience getting all this stuff again, So
Yeah.
I think that's something really big for that too. And like when you start over completely, you get to re-experience things with new people. And like one of my favorite instances of all time, and Tunkin is going to laugh because I always bring up this dungeon over and over,
Yeah.
is
Yeah, yeah.
Skullomance. And the very first time I ever ran it with Tunkin, and we tried to squeeze by everything, and he somehow managed to pull everything we squeezed by and this pug healer just tried to throw off everything on. Oh, it was probably just a running mob, like just trying to save Duncan from being the center of attention from this tank. But that's one of my favorite dungeons, and now I have this new hilarious memory with somebody that I enjoy playing the game with, and I would never have that because 2006 I didn't run it at max level because I wasn't max level then. So
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo the opposite. As a hunter during that, because the first few weeks was kind of hectic and crazy. If you didn't have a pre-established group, it was kind of hard to get into dungeons if you weren't specific classes. If you weren't part of the spell cleave meta, which was healer, healer, mage, warlock. If you weren't healer, mage, warlock, you couldn't get into spell cleave. If you weren't melee or a shaman, you couldn't get into melee cleave. And there were a few classes, Hunter was one of them, that I would try for hours, so I solo leveled all the way to 60, outside of doing a few dungeons after I hit 50. The first dungeon I did after Wailing Caverns was Zul'Farrak. And I did it 8 levels over level just to get my carrot on a stick. Because that was kind of like the meme back then was Hunters want all the gear. Hunters are going to do everything, right? And that is still kind of a meme that persists, but back then Hunters were in that awkward place where they weren't melee, they weren't casters, so you kind of get the worst of both worlds in there. But yeah, I never got into groups until I joined Creation, and we like Patar, like you guys have been saying, like farming Priebus is awesome, especially because I'm sitting here in leveling greens. Not even like I wasn't even getting dungeon stuff. I'm sitting here with like a crappy level 28 cloak that had 7 plus 7 agi and nothing else on it. That was my best cloak until 60.
Didn't you have a really shitty cloak until like BWL?
Yeah, I had a shitty cloak until I got
some random green.
Until I got Cape of the Black Baron, just randomly off of a undead strat.
And that was, I'm pretty sure that was like phase 2 when you got that. Almost phase 3. Like you're just in this random green.
Yeah, same thing with my chest piece. I think the chest piece had like 20 agi and some int and stamp.
We ran solo more times than I care to count, trying to get like one piece of the cadaverous armor for you, I think.
Yeah, and I never got it either.
And we never got it.
So from just on the other side of things, it's really nice that when I joined the guild, and especially after I hit 60, right? There's a lot of cheering, a lot of fun, and then Priebus farming was super cool. Just knowing like going into it, but at the end of Priebus farming, at the end of the tunnel, kind of segue into it. That's our raids, right? That's what we were farming Priebus for, and raiding Molten Core was super cool. I don't know if we had anything else before we wanted to get into that.
I think that's a fair segue. I remember our initial period of getting the MCs together as being very different from the current raids, because now we have sign-up sheets and Patar does roster and we oftentimes have over 40. But back in the day, Brunt used to stand in Kargath whispering everybody to ask them if they wanted to do MC. So we had
even Guildies.
Yeah, how many people did we have like initially for the MCs? It felt like it was 20 or something.
We had like 30, 35, something like that.
Anywhere from 30 to 35. Because I remember you used to have to whisper. You would be like, okay, we need 2 healers. And you would just whisper every priest and every druid.
/ who
you
priest
literally
60.
manual.
And the best part was how many people would go, oh, I'm not attuned, after we got them there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That was another special one. We did so many jump runs for Guildies, like, please just jump in the instance, we'll summon you over.
One of my favorite attunement memories was really late at night. It was like Friday night, 2 a.m. BRD with Tebow and Atlas, trying to get Atlas attuned. And Brunt wasn't geared, like this is phase 1, so it's not like I was carrying, but I was 60 and I'm tanking this as deep prot. And it took us a long time because the DPS in the group was extremely low. And we finished his attunement at maybe like 4 in the morning, and then we had raid at 1 the next day. So we did some pretty degen shit in Classic, but it was kind of fun getting to revisit that because we did that when we were younger, playing WoW to some extent, and then you get to be grown up and then still go hard and get stuff done.
I do remember watching you try to get your attunement run done, and they said, "Oh yeah, jump this side," and you're like, "This side?" And you jumped off the other side, and then hit the ground, didn't hit the lava, and died. And they're like, Braun doesn't have a res. Like,
That was
wrong
interesting.
side. Oh, that was one of my favorite clips.
Doing dungeon runs, just grinding dungeons to 60, and Braun is a healer who's an amazing healer, but inevitably people will pull and die, and it's like, okay, we only have one res, so
Guess we're running back.
guess we're running. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but also the dungeons are kind of designed in the way that like you can still kill it with 4 people.
Yeah.
You know, you just wait, just keep pulling, have fun. It's not the end of the world. It's like Brunt said, it's teaching patience.
Yeah, with the pull timer thing, I tanked in Wrath whenever they had the group finder, and I just tanked all the way up from 1 to 80 or whatever the max level was. And the tempo of the game back then in Wrath was faster than in Classic. The AoE was stronger, and healers just had more regen, so I would try to be the fastest tank that I physically could. But in Classic, one thing that's really interesting about it is the power of the buffs, but also the cost of the buffs. So something like Power Word Fortitude, buffing that to the group, even intellect and stuff, you're taking a third of a player's mana or more, it feels like, for every single spell. So just the preparation for this game, I think, is one of the aspects that sets it apart from every other iteration of WoW. Like getting ready for a raid or even just a simple fight or a dungeon can take a long ass time depending on how sweaty you want to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you see like all the top speedrun guilds are like 30 warriors, a mage, 2 warlocks, and then the rest are shamans. Like, it's just, they don't have to sit and wait. And the people that sit and wait, they're not important because they're not doing the damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not us though. I mean, looking at the logs, our first one that we had, we didn't kill Rag. We only killed up to Sulfuron Harbinger. We didn't kill anything else. We had 4 hunters, 4 rogues, 4 warrior DPS or so. We had 4 warlocks. We had Winter and Hoplite, both. We had we had Broken Helix as on enhanced. We had as a random elemental shaman named Cannon. And we had a bunch of healers. So even ever since day 1, our guild hasn't. It's not that we don't care about comp, right? We still want to have around 4 melee groups and around 4 caster and healer groups or something like that. But yeah, that's just never been a priority.
Well, that's
More with the people.
Another cornerstone of the guild vision is being inclusive. And the way that I see it is the content is not so difficult that you have to force people to play warrior to be able to clear it. I mean, yeah, it's going to take longer if you have a hunter instead of a warrior, but if you enjoy playing hunter and you want to have like the Pokemon experience with your WoW experience, then you should be able to raid as a hunter. And you're a person, and I wanted to emphasize like the people in the guild who are a good fit for the guild should be able to find a raid spot if they're dedicated and consistent and all that. It shouldn't be that you need to do this certain min-max kind of thing. I think a lot of us didn't even go into the game with any min-max mindset at all, really. Like my overall thought process was, I want to main tank and I want to do it well, and that's it. Like, I didn't really think about clear times or being competitive with other guilds, really.
I just wanted to experience the game, and I've done that and more, and it's wonderful. And I think something too, like, I always kind of refer a lot back to retail stuff, but a lot of the high-end retail guild leaders, they're like, just because, like, let's say Fire Mage is way better than Frost Mage, if you're going to force a mage to play Fire over Frost because he enjoys Frost more just because it's slightly better or it's meta or whatever, more often than not, the person's going to play worse. They're going to do less damage. They're going to not want to put time into their character. They're not going to want to show up to raid. They're not going to have fun, and you're just going to lose the person overall. There are people that don't mind what they play, and that's great, but there are some people that's like, I just love Frost Mage. I want to play it. So that's it. You'll most likely have a better player playing something they enjoy than playing something that's meta.
Yeah, there is a point, though, where you do have to help people and get some guidance, though. We had a mage and MC early on who was fire spec, and the units in there are immune to fire damage, so you actually can't influence the situation aside from giving people water.
Yeah, and
there's a
those
difference between
the influencing on like that, but like the kind of the idea is like you should let somebody play what they want to play because they'll enjoy it, especially if they can contribute. And that was just kind of like our bottom line is, are you contributing with what you're playing?
So yeah, you mentioned a couple legends of the guild. Broken Helix was
The Orc Shaman.
the Orc Shaman. This guy, if we can tell his story a little bit, is someone who was totally unknown to me. Apparently he had watched Neuro StarCraft content and stuff and rolled with us, but I didn't know who he was or where he was from or what he liked or anything, but he was there and ready to party up with us in the dungeon leveling grind. And he was kind of the gold standard for what we looked for in a creation member. He was super chill, super helpful. He tried his best to do his class. He was an enhanced shaman, which most people, and if you're min-maxing, would say that's not the ideal slot to bring. You'd say go spec resto. But if you pump and you're dropping your totems for the fam, it's a pretty major impact to the raid. So he was really incredible. He helped a ton of people get attuned for stuff. He was the kind of guy who would pretty much never complain about anything and was just always trying to be a team player. I found out that he's a guy from Texas who also grew up playing football, so he was kind of like a brother that I met in the game who ended up being a super top guy. He may show up again in the BC launch. We'll see. But
I can only hope.
Yeah, the game takes so much time though that we had a lot of players roll with us for a while, and then with the weekly preparation and the raid time and all this, it's just a whole bunch. I would say the commitment, even if you're in a casual guild for Classic WoW, is something like a part-time job. How many hours per week do you think y'all spend for like raid prep? If you were just gonna raid log, how much time does that take?
Probably if you want full buffs and stuff.
4 hours. 6 hours.
Yeah.
3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Well, depending on buff timing, could be like as little as an hour. If
Yeah,
you can,
if
like,
you
a
get
heart,
lucky,
get all that stuff.
Yeah, you catch a ZG, you go back, there's already a render in Ixia, go get a quick Songflower, get some in a DMF. It could be an hour, but I mean,
Yeah, it just
even
kinda
now,
depends on that.
like a Ren, we had times where Ren wouldn't drop for 6 hours, even though we're on the
Yep.
most populated
Yep.
server.
On that note, what's everyone's slash played? I'm curious.
Ooh.
Ooh,
That's
I'm
a good
at
one.
52 days.
84 days, 21 hours.
I'm at 85 days, 12 hours.
51 days, 21 hours.
54 days, 9
7
hours.
No, 87 days, 22 hours.
Yeah.
I've got the
Holy
highest.
moly, Timrear.
Tim's just
Temrir!
over here like,
Oh,
yeah, all the
173.
Farseers combined.
Wow.
Damn, dude.
Okay.
Blowing these kids out of the water.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Either way, though, we're all over 50 days. Like,
Yeah.
that's
And
and
that, that's the other thing I
it's
find-
it's like what 8 to 10 days just leveling alone.
yeah,
Yeah,
my
I
time played
have-
this level. It's about 10 days, yeah.
I have 11 days of leveling, or actually 10 and a half days for leveling. And then I probably did 20 to 30 hours easily, maybe more of PvP. And I was trying to rank, which was terrible.
Yeah, 1 to 60 took me 9 days of playtime.
Yeah, it's about the same there. Kind of a note off that is, in terms of time played and time committed, is just the amount of time people might have gotten from COVID happening, to be honest. Like, everything's shut down, you need a social outlet, you need something to do, and WoW's right there.
Yeah, that's a really weird aspect that colored this whole experience of Classic WoW, is that the launch, when things are fresh, happened August of 2019, and then it would have been spring of 2020. So after a lot of people were already max level, but whenever the raids were really in full swing, I think it was before Blackwing Lair came out, we're still at MC. during kind of phase 1, phase 2, and then the pandemic hits, and that's something that for all of us was unprecedented. Like, we haven't lived through another pandemic like this that had quarantine and like hysteria and a lot of job loss, and it was really a huge trial for our generation. But with quarantine, you're told to stay inside, and yeah, like you said, there's WoW there. But that, I feel like, shifted how people saw their experience in the game and what value they wanted to get out of it. Because if you're not able to go out and hang with your friends and do cool IRL stuff, then you kind of want to make sure you have fun somehow, and then you really want to make the WoW experience as perfect as it can possibly be. So I think if I had to guess at it, it would make people comparatively more obsessive with how much they tuned their WoW experience in the guild and how much they kind of expected out of it. But we don't have any control of like a reference of, whoa, this is what Classic was like without a pandemic. That's the story of it. And we're kind of moving into the dark portal just as we're getting people vaccinated and their questions about like masks coming off and stuff. But yeah, it's been pretty much a consistent part of Classic for almost the whole time.
And not only that, I don't remember if all you guys remember, but when the full COVID orders came into effect across the country and across the world, we had queue times on the server.
Yep.
That's what I was gonna say. Is though we have in-game play time, out-of-game play time was pretty massive as well. At least in the start. I remember before COVID, going into my work, and I would bring my laptop with me, and I'd remote into my computer back at home like 4 hours before my work was done,
Yep.
so that I could log in and queue for the 6-hour queue.
Ugh.
So we play on Whitemane, for anyone that doesn't know that's listening, which is one of the most populated servers. We didn't pick that by like any choice. We were like, well, Whitemane's a cool PvP server. That seems fun. I remember we were talking about, well, what server do we want to be on? We kind of thought like the PvP experience would be like, oh, cool skirmishes on the roadside, you know, encountering people while you're leveling and having small little battles, which it 100% pretty as much as not. But, you know, hey, we've stuck it out this long on one of the most populated servers. But yeah, our queue times were absolutely insane. And I'm sure this upcoming Tuesday is also going to be insane.
Yeah. I remember, like going to work at 8 in the morning, and I would have and you would guess, like you'd log in, you'd try to log in, and it'd be like, okay, queue time 4 hours. So you'd be like, okay, I gotta log in about an hour. Then you'd log in 30 minutes later and be like, queue time 7.5 hours. And you'd be like, oh, I'm gonna miss raid. But a lot of the times we just push raid back 2 hours because everyone was stuck in queue.
Yep.
Or you'd wait the whole 6 hours, but you were AFK for too long and you got put in the back of the line.
Yep,
I
you
guess
had to
I'm not
accept
playing
it.
today.
You had 15 minutes once you got logged in to log into your character, otherwise you were booted out.
Yeah,
And then there was that
playing
whole
retail at the same time, and I'd be like, I'm logged into Classic. I'm like, are we raiding tonight? And they'd be like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, if you are not about to pull the boss, I'm not logging off.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that kind of killed I guess another aspect of raiding, one that our guild historically hasn't ever required, which is world buffs. Since the beginning, the guild policy was we have never required them. I think in MC especially, I don't even think half the people who were raiding even knew they existed. Which, I mean, fair enough, I guess. But the world buff meta took its toll on us eventually.
And that's one of the aspects, is each of the phases that released basically added another world buff too, so it became more and more appealing as the phases went on, as like, oh, we can get ZG buff now, we can get Dire Maul buff now.
Yeah, they added buffs, and the content also increases in difficulty, which means the buffs have that much more value in increasing your chances of progressing and clearing more bosses and generating more loot and stuff. So it's a really interesting line to toe, because you have to decide how much you ask of your raiders and how much you require of your raiders in a way that they can achieve that. They're kind of self-motivated to an extent, but they're also not overwhelmed. And people have different appetites for how sweaty they want to be in this game. Like, you have some people who they're basically unhappy playing the game if they don't have the world buffs. Like, that's how they want to experience it. And other people, they really hate the whole process of like going around the world and just grabbing stuff, and then if you happen to die, you lose all that effort and you can't get it back unless you go out in the world and get them all again. So it's definitely a double edge that is super powerful and fun for some warriors and really unfun for a lot of other people.
Yeah,
I was gonna say,
Oh, go ahead.
some classes are transformed by world buffs too. Most notably warriors.
Yeah.
Having extra race generation completely changes how you can play the class. Some other ones like hunters or feral druids, it's a 10 to 20% bump in increase, especially when we only had Onyxia and Songflower, and that's it. But as we added more on, yeah, it got kind of crazy, especially now. Now, if we didn't have Chrono Boons, you're looking at Diremal, ZG, Onyxia, Rend, Songflower. You can also throw in Dark Moon Fair, which didn't happen until Phase 4, I think, Phase 3. You can also throw in Xanthopots onto there. If you wanted to, you can also get the seasonal ones, whether that's like the chocolates and stuff, or the rockets, or the Wickerman buff. There's a whole bunch
Light
of
of
those too.
Balloon.
Yep, Light of a Loon.
Say there was a lot of buffs you could get in this game.
Yeah.
You could min-max your character to the end of days. There's a Black Fathom Depths debuff. It's a debuff, it's not even a buff, so it can't be dispelled even. That will give you like +4 intellect if you want.
5 frost power, I think. That's the
Is it 5
It's
frost power?
10
Okay.
int and 5 frost power. Yeah.
There you go. There's another
I
little
remember Krantic came into a
optimization.
BWO with that.
Yeah. Let's just say I'm very happy that the world buff meta will be going away in Burning Crusade. I'm sure there's going to be something that we can do that we're going to be able to min-max our characters a little bit more. But even if we don't require it, it's always kind of been at the back of a lot of people's minds. It was at the back of my mind for a while too. Like, oh man, if I had just gotten buffs maybe throughout the week, maybe we wouldn't have wiped here. So there is a lot of, even though our guild doesn't require it, a lot of people felt some guilt sometimes for maybe not going and spending the time or whatever it was. Because when you get buffs as well, until they added these Chrono Boon Displacers, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later, you essentially wouldn't log on to your main anymore. And that was what felt the silliest to me, is like, I'm getting all these buffs so that I can raid, and then like I can't even play my main character for the week now. Because if I log in, I'm losing time on my buff.
Yeah, some people call it buff jail. Hey, can
It
you
sucks.
can you
It
help
really
tank
sucks.
this? No, Brunt is
No, I
he's
have
raid
buffs.
logged.
I can't. I can't go farm gold or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have to think about your time as like, well, I do want to show up to raid with buffs because it's fun to do, and it's fun to do a lot of damage, and buffs are the way you do damage. Like, gear is really important, but buffs are almost equally important on fights. And so if that's the kind of player that you are, it's fun to get them because it's fun to see big numbers. But then it's like, well, great, now I can't play my main guy that has all this cool gear that I want to run around the world and maybe PvP or whatever. Or yeah, exactly what Sammy's saying, which is you get full buffed, you spend all this time, you sacrifice not playing your main character, and then you die on the first trash because something happened. It happens, right? It's no one's fault necessarily, but like, that feels so bad. So world buffs, yeah, very happy to see them gone.
Yeah, the other kind of meta that it brought about was so we play in a PvP server, and Phase 1, there was no honor in the game. You couldn't get PvP weapons or anything like that. There was no incentive to do any battles in the world. But Phase 2 came out, and then honor was implemented, but we didn't have battlegrounds. And the first month of Phase 2 before AV and Warsong Gulch got implemented was the bloodbath of Whitemane. I never participated, but anecdotally, I remember getting my Hunter Leaf about a week before Phase 2 came out, and I could not complete Rock Dalar for over a month because all the demons are being camped consistently 24/7, because the only way that you could rank up and get honor was by killing people on the world. And so people were leveling, they'd ding 48, you would be corpse camped by a rogue for 6 hours. And the other thing that it came about was the dispelling meta. because most of the world buffs, if people don't know, a lot of them can be dispelled by a priest. So one of the worst experiences is the Alliance priests found a way to clip themselves behind the inn in Kargath. You would get summoned there, and then half your world buffs would get instantly dispelled before the priest died. Or there would be priests that were lying dead at the port spot in Org, and they would completely debuff someone and then die, and then just do that over and over again.
Yeah,
Six-pack Chad being the name that comes to mind.
For a reference of how much time we're talking about, for myself, I'll try to get my world buffs usually from Thursday through Friday and then be ready for Saturday. And a lot of that involves checking the White Main Discord to see any buffs that are announced. We have an add-on called Nova World Buffs where you can see when the next Dragon Slayer or Ren buffs are available again. And you have to have some level of focus on this. Like if I'm streaming or doing work or something, then a lot of the buffs will go off in the middle of a match and you just can't get it. So you do really need to book time where you can direct some focus to catching all these different buffs and moving your character around. So on the upper end of things, if it's a week where you get every single buff, you could spend focused time like looking at your computer trying to figure this out, 3 hours getting all your buffs. If you went to get your tribs from DM North, and then you get your Dragon Slayer and your Rend, and you get your Songflower, and then maybe it's DMF week, and you try to do some raid to Elwyn and get it, and then get summoned out. And you have this, say, 1 to 3 hours that you got all these buffs, and then the priest of the opposing faction can remove that 3 hours of work in about 2 to 3 seconds in just a couple global cooldowns of Dispel, because it removes 2 beneficial effects from the enemy player. And that, it feels pretty gross. Some people get a kick out of that just because you can tilt somebody and it's the sort of if you can't be famous, be infamous kind of a thing. But classic WoW compared to later iterations has a lot fewer bumpers for player behavior that would be seen as toxic or obnoxious, which is interesting because a lot of times I think people were looking at Classic coming back and being like, oh, it's going to be great. There's so much more player freedom to make decisions and organize things for yourself. I remember a lot of people being hyped that there's no more group finder, so you actually have to talk to people. But a lot of that stuff is pretty difficult. Forming groups was something that taught me a lot about leadership. Leadership, when you see it in the movies, it looks like the person with the most badass aim with their fancy gun and they fight the bad guys and everyone claps at them and they have a very attractive partner or whatever. Like that's what the image of leadership is in movies. But in reality, a lot of leadership is just being the person who does the tedious work of asking people if they want to go participate in a thing together. Like you're corralling people and asking a question that's kind of awkward and you're going to face a lot of rejection. Like if I was pugging for these MC runs and I'm whispering maybe 50 people, I get a few fuck yous, a bunch of no's, quite a few why are you talking to me, and some people will maybe talk shit about your guild or you or something like that. And it's not the most pleasant experience, but it's necessary and somebody's got to do it. So yeah, that's this whole guild leadership thing was a big awakening for me in that leadership is a lot less glamorous than you would think it is, and it really requires a lot of teamwork and support. Like a leader is not alone if they're going to be effective, and I'm really grateful that y'all have helped me lead the guild. We have Winter in the raid now too, who was our raid leader for what, phase 3? Phase 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really incredible like how much effort goes into leading a WoW guild. I could not have done this on my own. Like it's really obvious. There are so many different tasks that have been assigned to different people. It takes a ton of time doing any individual thing in the guild. Like Lathspell, you've been our loot master for a really long time, and that can be pretty technical and tricky. Patara has been your kind of second in that. And as we've learned with all the different add-ons and stuff and all the drama surrounding loot, that's a really big job. And it's a really tough job in Classic because there's so little loot per 40 people that kill a boss. I feel like that's one of the the big talking points of this whole story of creation in Classic is like the loot that we did or did not get, and every guild's experience is different.
And just kind of piggyback off the leaders not alone thing, we've all, I mean, all the Farseers have told Brunt that, you know, you need to like not take everything upon yourself, and I've been told myself by other people as well, and pretty recently that, you know, if there's something stressing out or you need assistance with something, like you just have to make sure that you're not taking everything onto yourself, because you burn yourself out. You don't follow in like the guidelines that you want to present yourself in as somebody that is trying to lead the guild.
Yeah,
And
we have definitely lost
we've had
really
to-
great officers that way.
Yeah.
And I do remember in, I think it was late BWL going into AQ40, that there was a lot of stuff that happened, bad stuff that happened, and Brunt took most of it upon himself, and we're like, dude, like there was a whole guild thing, like it wasn't just you. I mean, you know, ultimate decision was yours, but that's why you have people under you to assist you, because we're here to help. And I think it's been a learning and growing experience for not just me, but all of the higher ups in the guild, including the watchers that are, you know, just people that are people we trust that aren't officers within the guild, or that go above and beyond in the guild to do things.
I wanted to go ahead.
I was gonna say, for a bit of context too, phase 1, phase 2, we used EPGP, which was
It was
very.
fine. It was fine.
It was fine, except
It was fine enough that Lath wants his own system.
That's right, LPGP, dude. Come on.
yeah.
Are we
But
getting into loot systems now?
I was just gonna say, like, I mean, maybe like to just kind of bookmark where we're at. Phase 1, phase 2, MC. We had EPGP. Phase 1, our raid lead was Fafurian. And then going into phase 2, that transition from Fafurian into Winter. And the other thing that happened too, and I'll just minor mention it, is a lot of people got their ults up to 60 around phase 2. That also meant a lot of people swapped to either soak up more gear so we keep it in the guild, or a lot of people just completely re-rolled to most notably healers. Because in phase 1 and phase 2, like we kind of said before, we didn't have enough healers. Never. We never ever had enough healers. Didn't have any shaman. We had 2 shamans in the guild, and one of them was Broken Heel X, who's enhanced. So we never had enough shamans. We always had a bunch of priests, and we always had Brawn on as for the most part for the first few phases our lone resto druid. So yeah.
Clig was our first other resto druid. Before that, it was just me.
It was just you, and then Clig came along. And you know, we had a few other, I think, notable mentions as well, right? We had Butters, Asclepius.
Shout out to Butters. He
Shout
hates
out to
Patara
Butters.
and wants Patara to know that.
So,
Yep.
Fun Butters trivia. Brunt's Thunder Fury was, to the greatest extent, contributed to from him. He's played a priest, which is not the best farming class, but he helped out a ton with jump runs, and he had an ult that could transmute the bars from the arcane crystals. So I took note of everyone who contributed to the TF. Let me see if I can still find that.
While he's looking for that, I was going to say I can paint the landscape of Molten Core, where we were as a guild when we were starting that. It was a very who knows what the heck's going to happen kind of thing. As Brunt mentioned, we were needing to pug people basically every run, because we just didn't have enough solid, like, 40 people to show up every week. It's a lot to ask of 40 different people. Like, hey, can you show up this specific time every single week and make sure you're prepared with, like, consumes and stuff like that. So we had to pug a whole bunch of people. Our raid lead at the time, yeah, was Fafurian, so that means that he was telling us what to do, how the polls went. A lot of people, I would say a majority of people actually, I know this applies to me, it was my first time ever doing Molten Core. Like, I've done it in retail, but I never did it as current content. And it's a huge difference. Even if they've like re-released it, it's a huge difference because we are arguably at our weakest point going into Molten Core that first time, because we're all just in previous gear. We have no raid gear essentially. We've all attuned to it, or everyone has attuned to it, and we're gonna go in there and just try to do as many bosses as we can. It didn't help as far as clearing the run that we weren't like a super what we call sweaty guild. We didn't require world buffs. Like Tunkan said, a lot of us didn't even know what the heck it was, or that like it was super beneficial. Like I don't think we fully understood how impactful world buffs were for probably all of phase 1, maybe even into like phase 2. We used our loot system was EPGP. That was also, I think that was suggested by Naven actually. Naven was a shadow priest and one of the original guild charter signers, and was in the leveling group with Brunt and Braun and myself and Broken Helix. And so he said, hey, you should check out this loot system. It's really good. We need to figure one out anyways, because it's a little bit better than having everybody roll on stuff. And so we looked at it, and essentially what it was, just as a TLDR, it was you kill bosses, you get points, but it also factored in if you've already gotten gear while using the system. So like it would essentially assign you a priority, and then if you needed an item, whoever had the highest priority would get it. Getting an item would reduce your priority, etc., etc. And then we went into Molten Core, and I think we learned a whole lot about raiding, and just in general how to do it. You know, a lot of us didn't even like really know the correct rotations for our classes or any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I would
There
say
was a-
that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say just a quick aside on that. The first few Molten Cores, the top damage was a feral druid, a hunter, and a rogue. Specifically, shout out to Winter again. Me and Winter, I think, did a lot of. We were the ones who kind of like we playing these meme specs, weren't expecting me to do good, and we're topping the damage meters. And that was one of the first small things where it's like, hey guys, you know, if you learn your rotation, you can do more damage. Like look how much damage we're doing, and we're not even playing the best specs. So it definitely was like people didn't know how to push the buttons, and that's not a bad thing. We still cleared all Molten Core pretty consistently, especially after the first few weeks. We consistently killed up to Rag, and sometimes Rag wouldn't fall. Sometimes Rag would. I think we're one of the few guilds that can say that they've killed Rag in phase 1 after Submerge. Most guilds don't even.
Yeah.
Most guilds,
Dude,
still to this day, do you know that there's a Submerge on Ragnaros? That he has a second phase? If you don't kill him within 4 minutes, he submerges into the ground. A dozen fire elementals come out. You have to battle them while people are getting blapped by this big fire blast. And then he repeats back into phase 1. Brunt didn't even know he needed fire resistance gear. We had to go farm him a whole fire resistance set in order for him to tank.
The Dark Iron.
He even got that fire res buff from Ubers.
Yep. We did everything that we could, and the preparation from the players was, for the most part, just not there. But that's the type of people that were coming into play anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. It's just something that we had to factor into the whole scene of the raid.
Yeah, Ragna had to fight with the guy in chat.
Yeah, there was
Not
a
that
guy in
one.
my chat who was telling me that I needed more stamina to survive Ragnaros, but he does a knockback ability where you get kicked across the room and then the boss is hammering on everybody else. But if you're at 315 fire res, that's plus the totem, then you pretty much don't ever get kicked back anymore. So the fight is a lot more stable as the main tank. It's a little bit counterintuitive for a tank to have full FR on a fight. Later on in the tiers of raids, usually the main tank is the only person who does not use resistance, but for MC and for Blackwing Lair, there are a few fights where you want to be all the way up at FR cap, and they end up being pretty fun. I didn't really change my fire res set at all, even though I tank a bunch of Blackwing Lair in phase 6 for GDKP, just because it's kind of a fun revisiting of being able to do the fight with the original gear at that tier. Baron Geddon's a pretty tricky and funny fight. Full FR for that in the first few weeks, and then Ragnaros to prevent getting kicked back, and then Firemaw was another fight that we slowly learned through to kind of visit the transition of raid lead from Fafurian to Winter. Fafurian was my raid leader back in Wrath of the Lich King when I was on a Torn warrior called Vunt, named after Wilhelm Wundt, the experimental psychologist. Brunt sounds kind of similar to that, and it's also pretty cool as a main tank name. But we raided back in the day, and I messaged him on Facebook before Classic came out and said, yo, do you want to roll together? And he said, yeah. So he raid led us through MC, and then moving into BWL. I remember he was with us on our first ever Blackwing Lair. Holy shit, dude. That was
the time.
That was brutal. So
oh my God.
We went into BWL first time, so we have some MC gear, but a lot of people are probably still pre-bis-ish. And we go in there with 34 people in the door. There's big turnover every single phase, but we didn't have a bunch of players join at the same time, so we were shorthanded. And we got destroyed for 3 hours. We didn't advance past Razor Gore. The stuff coming out of the doorways was just too much. We did the 4-corner strat where we had some tanks in each corner, but we just failed the power check. We didn't have enough stuff to be able to hold back the tides of units coming out. And there was a point where I think I called for us to like jump up and down to like just be silly and have some fun, because we get no loot from it, we get no progress from it, we get to experience the fight in practice, but yeah, you came up empty-handed.
Yeah, we had like, what, 25 people, 30 people that first day?
34.
We had 30, and it spiked up to like 35, 37, and then like one person would leave. Then we'd be like, oh, one person's on the way, and we'd do a poll, and then like 2 more people would leave by that time that one person got there. So we just like fluctuated. We never had the full 40. But even if we had the full 40, I was like pretty confident we were just like out of our sorts for that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rough day.
I'll also bookmark it. That was the first guild rebuild, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
We came into MC last week at MC. We were 40 people strong. The last few months at MC,
Really good.
we were getting full guild every single time that we implemented our loot system. We got that going. And then week 1 BWL, 10 people don't show up. Like 15 people don't show up. Some of the, I'm not going to name anyone, but yeah, we had some people, especially the people who were just consistently there from day one, just didn't show up.
Yeah, it was a real big shock to me. I remember, like, why? Why is this? It's the new content. Don't you guys want to see the new stuff? But I think Phase 1 into Phase 2 was, again, it was just a continuation of how kind of sweaty that classic WoW is, and now even another buff is being like potentially added, as far as like you can now get Nefarian Head if you miss Onyxia and stuff like that. And I think what it ultimately came down to was just a bunch of people were probably on the fence of quitting. The difference between progressing a raid and like going in and just clearing a raid that you know you can easily do is pretty huge. Because, like Brent said, the first ever BWO we just wiped on Razor Gore for like 3 to 4 hours. And that was the entire raid. Like, whereas in Molten Core, we could go in, kill every boss. It feels really good to do that because you're going and you're scooping up all this gear. Now you're going into another raid where you suck. Like, you're terrible again, and you have to re-establish that power curve until you can, get gear from Blackwing Lair and start doing that kind of thing. So I think it was a really big shock, and I didn't realize how many people were going to leave or not show up, and then continued to really just not show up. Like, they basically quit, like a lot of them.
Well, every phase was a big question mark. Like, you want to assess, based on how the previous phase went, do I want to commit to an entire other phase, which I think is why our guild and pretty much every other guild had substantial turnover. So whenever Phase 3 comes out, Blackwing Lair is added. Our thought was, oh shit, we're going to have so many players. Who are we going to bring to the raid? And then a whole bunch of people suddenly quit. Because
I think our shit show day too also like made people go, oh, we won't be able to do this, and they just dipped.
Yeah.
Yep. And also put a few more things into it. BWL, people were frustrated with EBGP. it was much as we meme it up, it's not a perfect loot system by any means. Especially the way we implemented it. People could come in, get a piece of gear, and leave immediately. Even after implementing a 2-week cap so that people couldn't get gear, they would still wait 2 weeks, get 3 pieces, get out of there because EBGP waits it so hard. Someone like Braun got all their tier and could not get a single anything else, could not get a weapon, an offhand, or anything else. Or any of those off-spec pieces, Wild Growth Spalders, for example. Like, you couldn't get them. So we made the decision to switch. Also, during those first 2 BWLs, a few people were promoted up to officer. Myself was in that group. Fleet Flammer, Grace, were also promoted up to officer, and there was some switching around in the top. And yeah, and the other thing to mention was week 2 BWL was the longest raid that Creation's ever had.
9 hours.
Yeah, 9-hour BWL. We went from having half of a guild group and half pugs, wiping on Firemaw for an hour and a half, killing Firemaw, struggling our way to Chromagus, killing Chromagus after, I think, 4 pulls.
We did it pretty quickly.
And then getting to Nefarian, wiping it once and calling it a day. But we struggled our way through BWL that second week, and a lot of people still remember that were there because we kept rotating pugs in and out. We had a different raid leader come in and help, just try to get us through it. And some would say dark day, but some other people would say something else.
That was a very long raid day.
It was a long raid,
and we had some very interesting people, like like Delete said, the Dodge build hunter. But then when we came back Sunday to try to kill Nefarian, we made the biggest mistake ever and invited 13 warlocks. And then when the warlock class call happened, everybody died.
That was pretty funny.
I was like, I don't think this is going to be a good idea. And they're like, no, it's fine. And then we all just died.
Yeah, the shift there, and this is a concept that Winter and I talked about quite a bit when he was the raid leader, was the Ship of Theseus. Maybe some of you have heard of that concept, but if you have a ship and parts and parts and parts are replaced over the course of its lifespan, is it still the same ship that it was at the end of its long journeys that it was when it started? And the answer to that is kind of a yes and no. One of the things that I wanted to maintain was the ship always going in the same direction. I don't want to force people to play the game or stay in the guild, so it was an interesting practice and experience for me in seeing people and friends who I know and love who just say, well, I'm not really into it, I'm not going to keep playing the game, and not hold that against them and not try to say, well, we're not going to be able to have a full 40 if you quit. You want to love them enough to let them go, which is something that I learned from my world lit professor in university. He was a single dad, and there was a kid in the class who was like, well, if you're such a good dad, like, why are you not still with your ex or whatever? And he said that sometimes you have to love someone enough to let them go. So the game has so much of a time commitment to really play it to its fullest that, yeah, I can completely see why people would need to quit. And we've always said IRL comes first, but with this shift in Blackwing Lair, the guild did end up changing to be a lot less of the Neuro StarCraft fam and a lot more of the White Main server. And we also shifted more in the tryhard direction over time. So if you're looking at our creation logs for MC, yeah, it's pretty amateur leagues kind of stuff. We had a good number of strong players, but overall it was very, very slow clearing guild. And then in Blackwing Lair, we got more and more focused on really trying to pump and to clear fast and to improve our fights and things like that. And I think, I don't know if you have the Blackwing Lair logs up, there were some weeks where we were really parsing really high, and we ended up getting...
Yeah, I'm pulling them up.
We got a lot more focused on parsing as a thing. We ended up creating a chat called Talk About Your Parses because we had some people who really don't like the game being put into that kind of framework. You lose sight of a lot of the lore and the fun of like Thrall being the war chief and just what's happening in the game, why you're fighting Nefarian and Blackwing Lair, if you're just focused on the numbers of the parses at the end of the raid. And it's tricky for me because I like to zug. I like to pump and try to be the biggest, fastest, most powerful main tank that I can. But at the same time, not everyone should be required to focus on the game that way. And we didn't ever set a like hard parse requirement where you need to parse this big to have a spot with us. So that's another really major deciding factor in how guilds are run, is how focused they are on the logs and people's results as opposed to attendance and fun.
Yeah. For reference, in Phase 1 and Phase 2 in Molten Core, by the end of it, I had an average of 95.1, which is an orange. I was the only person in the guild that got there. At the end of BWL, we had 21 people who had parsed average 95 or higher. So, and that is the most by far ever. Like, we had a lot of people who were very, very focused on performance, and were very focused on a lot of the mechanics that made everyone better. World Bus is the number one thing. We never required them, but there was definitely a lot of time during BWL where a lot of people felt pressure to get them, especially because everyone else had them, but it wasn't a good pressure. It was a kind of an ominous and menacing pressure, like a "why don't you have world buffs? We're trying to get good parses" sort of pressure.
It's a results-oriented pressure that's similar to if you're on a competitive sports team, and if you don't perform well, you can lose your spot on the team. And that's a really interesting dynamic. If you're a raider and you're logging in for your classic WoW raid, which is a video game, and you're not getting paid for this and it's for fun, but maybe you're a raider who's kind of riding the line of, I don't know if I'm going to have my raid spot, that feels very intense and not fun, I would guess, for a lot of people, unless they're the kind of person who's trying to punch into a competitive guild and they think they've got the right stuff. If you're just a person who has a limited amount of time to play this game and you're against other people who have way more time than you, it's really hard to compete. So I guess that kind of links into with the world buff thing. Whenever we started the summoning squad, I think that was Kiwi, Krantic, a few other people who helped out with that. I've helped out with summons a lot over the course of the game too. But we created a route where we started summoning people to different key spots so they could get all these world buffs in a more guild-wide fashion. That made things faster, but it was at the cost of those summoners' time. You have to get a warlock, go out, kill a bunch of stuff, get a whole bunch of shards. A lot of people have a warlock summoning ult that just has shards only, and that's kind of their whole purpose in life, is to summon people to different buff spots and to the raid and that kind of thing. And we definitely benefited from that in terms of our results, but it, like Tunkom was saying, it really added to the tense air of the room. Whenever we're in Blackwing Lair and people know that if I die, I'm not going to be able to parse in the 90s, so it was really tense.
Yep.
And that really...
Go ahead.
Pull the curtain back a little bit. That caused a lot of tension in officer meetings as well, where there's kind of clashing philosophies and personalities kind of came to a head more often than not after raid. There was not much time to decompress from the raid before going into some serious topics and difficult conversations where kind of raid ideologies were really at play.
Mm-hmm.
To carry on.
And to be fair, looking at our actual numbers, we were a top 50 Horde guild on Whitemane as far as clear time, and it did improve us, right? We had the most parses, we had the fastest clears, by far, and it was, I think, for some people, myself included, honestly, right? That was the golden age of creation as far as being able to go try hard goes. It was by far the most try hard thing in existence of the guild. But if you're someone who loves those big numbers, it was the best way to get them. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was probably the best time to be a parser in creation, but it was by far my worst time being an officer in creation.
I agree,
without a doubt.
The first month of officer meetings were pretty chill, but they just got longer and longer and longer. I remember we had some 4 or 5 hour meetings. Like we were waiting for an hour and a half tops, and we'd hop into a 4-hour officer meeting.
Yeah, I was not an officer at that time, but I remember at the very beginning of uh, MC, because I was the first warlock to 60. I was the warlock class lead, and we had class leads and people from the stream that were like VIP and stuff like that all had officer chat and stuff. And I remember halfway through MC, we were like, we need to redo ranks, and ranks got redone. And then there were people upset they didn't have officer chat and stuff. And towards like the end of MC, I was just like, I'm not playing as much as I should be to be able to make officer decisions and stuff. Like, and this was about the time Kagran had been in the guild for a while, and I was like, Kagran's been doing above and beyond, like, bump him up. So he got bumped up to officer, and I just went down to what was the watcher rank, and I didn't step up into a officer position until I think like AQ or midway through AQ or whatever. But
It was AQ.
Phase
Yeah.
It
5,
was
yeah.
yeah,
last
somewhere
2
in
weeks
there.
before AQ. That's when we did the second restructure.
Yeah, but there was a lot of restructure that went on a lot in MC and then a little bit in BWL, and I just remember getting told by Tunkin and Kagran, they're just like, time to go into a 4-hour meeting, and I was like, one reason I'm not an officer, like, I don't have time for that, nor do I want to have time for that. I was like, I just want to play the game and have fun, and it never sounded like it was fun to be an officer. And kind of towards the end of BWL, when we started having a lot of turnover and a few people weren't really wanting to do officery things and whatnot, I was like, if you guys really need it, like, I don't mind stepping up, because I started playing more, but there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that a lot of people didn't see as, you know, watcher and lower, because there was just so much going on. And I felt like BWL was like a fun raid, but then everything outside of it was just not.
Yeah.
And
that kind of-
I remember we had that switch from the EPGP to DKP, and then they had the
DKP plus
conversion.
Loot Council.
Yeah, plus Loot Council,
Yeah.
which was fine, but then like there was the week they wanted to do, like, the officers were talking about getting like world buffs, and if you got world buffs and you came, you got like an extra like 2 DKP for this and 2 DKP for that and 1 DK for this, and it was announced like Thursday. I'm like, what? Like, there are people that are not gonna be able to get that, and you're just literally screwing people that don't normally get world buffs. And that was a big thing in watcher officer chat, and just like there just was things where it was like all of a sudden we were trying to be more optimized and get through things, and then at the same time people were like, well, I thought we were a lot more chill about stuff, but this was also like we were trying to be more consistent. So
Yeah, we
it
had
was
yeah.
it was interesting.
we had edged more and more try hard, and just to kind of articulate it was like a tug of war in the officer corps for a while, where there wasn't unity in terms of the direction of the guild. We were kind of split between, are we an inclusive guild who will accept people as people in the guild first, even if they don't parse high, even if they're a meme spec, because we like them as people and we want to raid with them over time. And I think the most crucial Loot Council decision that we made that I think really set our trajectory true for the guild was probably Sammy's Maladath, because
Yeah.
we
That
had
was
we had a lot of I guess turmoil in the rogue section of like who were the rogue spots, and we had a variety of rogues of sword or dagger spec, and there was another rogue, was it Snuggles? Snuggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, he joined, and he raids rogue on another character as well, and his rotations were really tight. He could play his character quite well, but he was relatively new to the guild. Most people didn't really know him that well. And Sammy is a friend of Tuncon's, and we're an inclusive, like, casual guild. That was how I was kind of thinking about us. Sometimes we're described as semi-tryhard, because we do have some tryhard players. But do you give Maladath Runeblade of the Black Flight, which is one of the best swords in Phase 3 and 4, to someone who hits their rotation a little bit tighter and shows up with more world buffs? Or do you give it to the person who has been creation from Phase 1? And there was debate, and we didn't have a unanimous decision on it, but ultimately the vote went to Sammy getting Maladath. And that was a decision to give the item to the person, I think. And it ended up turning out in a really amazing way. Sammy ended up getting like top damage on Patchwork one week, which is the just straight up DPS race, with that weapon and another Blackwing Lair weapon. So he doesn't even have AQ weapons, and he tops the meter. And just seeing that trajectory of maybe Sammy didn't have as much time to play at that same time as Snuggle. Maybe he hadn't mastered Rogue to the same extent, but he's a cool guy, and I like Sammy. So him getting the item is something that I think was totally the right call. And then, yesterday, we kill Kel'Thuzad, and I just looked at my details. He dealt the most damage to Kel'Thuzad in that fight, and then he ended up getting a Hungering Cold. So it's those kind of moments that you really decide, as a guild, who are we? Looking out for the people on the team is the priority, but there was a lot of opinion about, well, we should just give it to the sweatiest players who are going to give us the best overall results. And that's what caused the meetings to be so long. Was I really love players who are friends of mine who really represent the guild on like a character basis really well. Like, they're good people who are kind to others and they're fun to be around. That's more important to me than how much damage you can deal with your items and your gear and stuff. But not everyone wants to play the game that way. And that's a really tricky thing, because that means that not every guild can give you what you want. You have to find the guild that fits the way that you want to play the game. And we had many a debate about that.
Yeah, BWL, that's like one of the probably chapters where the officers core was the most split it's ever been.
Yeah, and
Determining
ZG as well, because ZG was in the middle there.
Mm-hmm.
ZG was a breath of fresh air. And we had our Sundays, right, or Saturdays, where it was all this super tense, like, are we try hard, are we not? Who does these items go to? Officers trying to make 100 decisions but making none. And ZG comes down the middle of it, and ZG is an awesome raid. It's only 20 people instead of 40. There's still some, like, still to this day, some, like, third or fourth best items in there. It's fun, it's fast, it's easy. The bosses are all cool. I think it's a really coolly themed place. And it was definitely a breath of fresh air for coming out of phase 3 into phase 4. But that also added another world buff.
Yeah.
Part of a car. So.
And there was some memes about group creation in there. I was trying to take the reins of group creation. There were some disagreements and some perceptions that did not come off the best, and ultimately led to some changes in the officers, including myself being pushed back down a rank.
Yeah.
At the time, it was a whole
Kagran
thing.
was pushed down to rank, and I want to say Tebow left.
Atlas, I believe, pretty much left.
Yeah.
He started to play AQ, and then I think then he was like, I'm done.
Yeah,
So we were either losing officers that were kind of more true to the creation mindset, or we were like demoting them.
It was specifically focused on consolidating power, is what it felt like, because a guild is a big entity when you have 40 people involved. And it was the opinion of some of the officers at the time that if you were an officer, you had to do this much stuff, otherwise you didn't deserve to be an officer. It should really be someone who's dedicating a ton of time to it. And the officers who were calling for this, they were putting in shitloads of hours just online in the game, thinking about stuff, talking about stuff. And then other people, recruitment as well. And other people, maybe they have a job that they have to work, and then they have a partner and kids that they have to take care of, and then they get maybe an hour to play Classic WoW in a day. And it was their opinion that people in that category were not as worthy of being officers because they weren't online and active and making stuff happen in the guild as much. So it was called to demote Kagran, a few other people as well. They're saying these people don't deserve to be officers. And that ends up meaning that the people who remain officers have a lot more say on which way the guild is going. And I think that connects with a mistake that we made overall in giving some people too many things to manage for themselves. It gives you a lot of influence over the guild, and it gives you a lot of power, but it also gives you a big load of stress and a burden that isn't really fair for you to shoulder yourself. improved on this in the kind of restructuring of the guild in Phase 5 for distributing the tasks more evenly across people. When Winter was raid leader, he was getting burned out because he was doing stuff that we divide now among about 4 people. I think he was doing roster, raid leading. He did a lot of our spreadsheet management and stuff as well.
Strats.
He was helping with summons. He was doing strats. He was doing callouts. He was doing group organization. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I do probably half of that with just doing group organization / roster, just trying to get people in. I know that several of us do callouts for different things. Like on Resuvius, I call out the shout just because it's something I have to watch out for anyway. And we've divided a lot of what Winter did into just evens. I'm not going to call us lesser, but like the lesser farseers. Like I'm just doing the roster, and then Kagran's doing the making sure everybody's behaving themselves stuff, and Tunkin's doing his raid leady stuff, and we kind of like divvy that out among the 3 of us. And then Lath does his loot stuff, and Brunt does his main tanky stuff, and Braun does his Healy stuff, and being the unbiased person in the background with a lot of our decisions and stuff. And there is a lot of power that Winter, like not power, but a lot of work that Winter had to do and did, and I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did, to be honest, with when he left and everything had to be divvied out, how much of it actually had to be spread out.
Yeah. There was can I talk about your situation a little, Kagran?
Yeah, for sure.
So Kagran joined at a similar time to a couple other officers, and I kind of thought that y'all were like a trio sort of thing. Turns out no.
No, no. Completely disconnected.
Yeah. But Kagran had been top bloke, basically, from what I could tell. But it was kind of pitched that the way that you were structuring the ZG groups was to funnel yourself gear. And you got the Bloodvine set first, which, man, one thing about Classic that's really silly is people shit the bed over items in one phase, and then the next phase it's trash. Just as
Amen to that, dude.
a really funny thing that we lack the foresight of during Classic. Stuff like what was it? Mage Blade, it was a big item. Like Staff of Shadow Flame. Right now it like goes for like 800 gold. It's really silly.
Well,
But
I mean, with Kagran doing that too, I know I don't know if it was just me, but I know he would be like, do the groups look okay? Is there anybody that's like mega overlapped on one item or whatever? And I would just kind of come through and be like, well, you have 4 mages in this group and they're all on the cloak, and you have nobody on the cloak in the other group. Oh, okay, I'll switch that. Like, you know, it was little things like that. I think that was more after his first call out, but from my perspective, it was he was trying his damnedest, and then everybody else was like, you screwed me over on this item.
Yeah, well, it's impossible for him to have the groups be perfectly even in strength and also perfectly even in everyone getting the gear that they want. It's going to be like the best average that he can possibly make if he's taking 40 people and putting them into 2 ZGs. So I think we had one conversation first where they were calling you out and saying he's being greedy, blah, blah, blah. So I was talking to you on the phone on a ferry that I was riding over to see my parents. And then there was another thing where you hosted a Onyxia and reserved the neck for yourself, which now in hindsight, that's something that happened a lot of times. Like a lot of people do that, and that's pretty standard because you're the one who's organizing it and also tanking it, which is the greatest part of the administrative overhead. So for you to reserve one item is totally standard and normal. But it was kind of fit into this narrative that, oh, Kagran's just like really greedy and he doesn't deserve to be a Farsi or whatever. So we ended up going through with the demotion. I felt like it was an edge case, and I didn't really feel good about it at all. But you were a complete and total class act. The very next day, just being really chipper and positive and pulling your weight and doing your thing and stuff. And that's kind of when the eyebrows started raising of like, was this the right call? Because Kagran seems to be solid to me, and the evidence was kind of sketchy. So I hadn't been in a situation like this as the guild leader where officers are calling for other officers to be demoted and thinking about what to do with all this. But it turned out that Kagran was actually the the class act in all this. We had a couple loot council calls that were pretty weird, and I guess we could talk about Avid's tier. That was probably the first big moment where shit really began to hit the fan.
There was stuff. There was a lot of loot council
I
stuff
remember this.
from
Oh, shit.
caster stuff.
Yeah,
I
just
got
to
whispered
really
all the
quickly,
time about it.
our loot council at that point, we had swapped over to DKP plus loot council. What that meant was we had pretty much all the big ticket items, weapons, the trinkets. If you know BWL, the biggest hitting items: Drake Fang Talisman, Staff of the Shadow Flame, the Caster Claw, Claw Crow Magus, for example, the crossbow for hunters. All of that stuff was on reserve. Everything else was DKP, Silent Bid, which is still what we use today. We've gotten rid of the loot council since, but at that point, loot council, the big items, and everything else, tier and stuff like that, was going for DKP. Silent bid meaning that you have a 30-second timer. You can bid as many times as you want. Your highest bid will be accepted, but you can't see anybody else's bids. So, and that is still a point of contention, but that's what we ended up going with. And loot council, we had three iterations of loot council. The first iteration of loot council was myself. I want to say it was myself, Fap, few of the other, myself, Fap, Fleet, Tebow, and Kagrin or something like that. Yeah. It was all watchers and officers, and that kind of leads into the questionable loot decisions that came in to follow.
Well, there's the concept that people talk about, which is a bro council, and it's kind of like the bro council is a bunch of bros and they give each other loot. There's some overlap between who's putting the most time and effort into the game and who's an officer, which oftentimes means that they're going to say, well, I'm playing the game more, I'm parsing higher, so if the item goes to me, then I'm going to pump more with it than someone who's raid logging would, which has an element of truth to it, but there's a point where you give all the officers a round of loot council items, and then you circle back and give the officers a round of items again. So one of the things that I said in a lot of these meetings and said to the guild was, I want to try to get one loot council item to every person first before we give people their second loot council item. And that would apply to everybody, myself included. We did have a main tank prio with the EPGP phase, but once we got to the LC plus DKP, there was no prio for anyone in particular. It was just down to the loot council's decision for who gets these trinkets and who gets these weapons.
This is a brave warlock.
Not anymore.
Dude, we need the honor for pre-patch.
What a name.
But yeah,
What was the tier thing that happened then?
Yeah, the
I
tier
remember
situation
it,
was the
but for
biggest one.
everybody else,
Well,
it's the one of the
actually, I'll mention one other quick one before that. Our second Maladath. First one went to Grace. Second one did not go to Sammy. Second one went to Brunt. And that was not in the cards for the loot council. That was not the initial decision that was made. That second Maladath dropped. We went into loot council for I think 20 minutes, if not more.
We took a break over it.
We took a break in order to try to figure out who was supposed to get this item. And the sheet had listed Sammy as the correct recipient of it. And it was argued by a bunch of people back and forth for 20-25 minutes on who should get it. And this was, again, during that phase where it's like, is Sammy going to get the slot? Is Snuggle going to get the slot? And the consensus, the incorrect consensus the loot council came to was, since we don't know who's going to get this slot, we shouldn't give it to a rogue. And we ended up giving it to Brunt instead. Which was a second loot council item for Brunt before most people had gotten one. That was the first one that kind of stuck out in my mind.
Did I get the DFT first?
You got a DFT, and then you got the first DFT because that's like just absolutely huge for tanks. And then you also got a Maladath, which was not fault of your own. You literally didn't have control of the loot council. That was the decision of the loot council at the time. But then the other big one was Avid's tier.
Yeah, that one had a different element to it. So whenever the tier dropped, loot council decides who's getting it. We had I think we had a rough order with like a spreadsheet at the time.
Yeah.
But then we had some freedom of like if people made some decision. Aside from that, you could like make a bid for, hey, I think this person should get it instead. The problem is if you have, say, 3 contenders for a LC item, like I guess my item had an element of this as well. If there are multiple contenders and then it goes to a random person who wasn't on the list, then that's going to be upsetting for people who thought they were going to get it. And then in this case, I found out later that Avid was told that he was getting the next one for sure. So as soon as the tier dropped and he didn't get it, he just quit. And to me, that kind of looked like, oh, maybe he's just mad that he really wanted it, but he didn't get it. But it has a different flavor to it whenever it was promised to someone as a sort of like encouragement tool. So Avid, just to talk about his contribution to the guild, he was the kind of player who was on the game a ton, definitely a morning person where he's up early, and he boosted a bunch of people's level 60 alts through like SM farm, ZG farm, that kind of thing. So a lot of people's second round of characters Avid boosted, and that was kind of a thing that was mentioned to him of, hey man, thanks for doing this for us. Yep, you're totally going to get the next tier. So it sort of felt like it was a bit of a reward for his effort in helping people out. And he ended up leaving the guild. I didn't know that context, and I think I was on vacation in Oregon with family and talking with Winter about the kind of story behind why Avid quit, and then talking to Avid and talking to some other people about this, and then really kind of combing through the weeds of what happened in this situation, what was the mistake that was made, and how can we rectify this. And after that, we flipped the loot council sheet to be public instead of private. Before, there was a loot council sheet, but since the raid couldn't see it, the guild couldn't see it as a whole, only the officers could see it. So if you didn't abide the top 3 on the sheet, I mean, nobody would be the wiser. So why would they get upset, kind of a thing. So transparency was a big shift there. And yeah, that was a really big turning point in kind of the trust of how we saw different people in the guild and whether or not they were really for the team or kind of using their station for their own benefit.
Yeah. The other important thing about it too was we heard 3 different stories from 3 different sides, and they were all different on what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the outside observer story matched up with the story being told by some people and not others.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the one that we eventually later found out was the correct story.
Yeah.
But then after that, there was the big blow up.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was over. I think it was over something super tiny and minuscule. I think it was like food buffs or like something like that. I don't even remember.
I remember the moment. If I can quote it, oh man, it was so intense. And
as a point of reference, the tension between the officers at that point was like critical mass.
Yep.
Everyone was unhappy. Everyone hated what they had to do. Everyone hated having to do these officer meetings, and nobody was really there. It was definitely split like into 2 factions. There was like clearly 2 sides. Oh,
Small note in game, these guys hurt.
but yeah, Brent, you go for the actual explanation, because I think I was farming Cold Rage daggers at the time that this went down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a meeting that was so vicious that I ended up ending the stream. So normally what we would do is we do the Saturday raid, and then after the raid, I'll put on a video. Usually I would do Wayfarers, our D&D campaign, which would give me 2 to 3 hours worth of time to have the officer meeting. And then I would come back and do StarCraft replay casting. But this meeting was so intense and long that there wasn't time to just put on a VOD. I decided to just end the stream for the day and then carry out this conversation. And a lot of it came down to trust. That was one of the main talking points of it, of do you think I'm truthful and honest? And Winter, I feel like he was the guy who was the straw who broke the camel's back.
remember this now.
There's a very angry question. Are you calling me a liar? And then Winter just kind of quietly, he waits. Like 4 seconds. It felt like the longest 4 seconds ever. And then he says, yes. And that was like when everything kind of blew up. Shit hit the fan. It was clear that there was a lack of trust within the officer corps, which maybe is the most important thing. Like, more important than your direction is your ability to trust each other to all strive for the same kind of objective and goal. And yeah, there was a series of fights with me and officers in question about that over the next few days. And that's when we had some pretty major turnover in the guild, and then we had a meeting about it. So after that decision was made, we had people booted, and then we just brought it into a open Q&A with the raid, where we jumped in Discord and said, anyone who has questions about the decision or reasons for this, like, this is an open forum and we'll just talk it out. And that was a really big shift in the guild. I guess I should go back one step. Before the big, like, drama moment during the meeting was the creation feedback survey. So there was an idea that was pushed around in the guild that people are really unhappy, especially the tryhard players, and they are going to leave the guild. And this was something that got brought up over and over and over again of like,
we need to make these changes, otherwise they're gonna leave.
we need to have a second raid.
Yeah.
A second raid of 40 people, and if we don't have that, the guild is going to collapse. So that was a big question for us, and we ended up not going for having a second raid team. But I was skeptical of this assessment of saying that we're actually about to collapse, because I had heard from a lot of people that they're having a pretty fun time. So I did a survey without asking if that would be cool, because I'm the guild leader and I feel like I should be able to make a heckin' survey if I want to. So I made a survey and just posted it. And one of the questions that we asked was, are we more or less tryhard than you think we should be? And it has one of the most gorgeous normal distributions I've ever seen in my entire life, where the vast majority of people said, yep, this is right about what I want. And there were maybe like 2 to 4 people who said I want it to be more tryhard than it is, and maybe a similar amount on the, I think we're a little bit too tryhard, I would like to tune it back a little bit. So that told me that these claims were not legit, that maybe, yeah, some people did want it to be more tryhard, but it was dramatically overblown that we were about to collapse because of it. And that's when we had a really major falling out. It was a pretty big battle within the officer corps. It was a eye-opening experience for me in who you can and cannot trust. And I definitely feel really grateful to Winter and Lath especially in helping me kind of see through the situation. It's difficult to know who to trust, right? Say you're firing up a game like Classic WoW and you're raiding through a few phases and you know people for equal amounts of time. So it's their words against each other. And I try to see the best in people and assume the best in people, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people actually don't like you and they want your job and your role and that kind of a thing. And it's difficult to see that. So being able to rely on other people to help me understand what was going on, and also to figure out what is the direction that we want our guild to be going in, what is the vision for creation, and are we keeping true to that, and then finding our way. And we made that call, which I would say was fully correct, and I would make it again. And that's right before AQ40. So we had a huge battle and falling out right before one of the hardest phases of content that hit, which was a really scary choice to make. Because we're moving into a harder raid tier than Blackwing Lair, and the guild ended up readjusting itself to being a bit more casual. So we had a few other people leave the guild at that time because they did want more of a kind of semi-competitive sports team environment where they wanted to clear fast. They wanted to be with a guild where everybody gets their world buffs and everybody zugs really hard. One of the members who's still a friend of ours in that group would be Dominion. Dominion is a warrior who did off-tanking for us, and he kept a lot of his characters in creation because he had no beef with us. He just wanted to raid in a faster guild in addition to having a character in creation. But holy crap, it was kind of like at that period we had a big schism and a bunch of the trees in the forest fell, but that caused a bunch of new life to sprout up and really turn into something amazing. I asked Tunkon during all of this, hey, do you want to raid lead? And
Yeah, that was something. Is officers we kicked was the raid leader.
Yeah. The raid, to be fair, it was
out.
Well,
The
the funny thing about all that too is we all had a, hey everybody, we're gonna get in Discord and we're gonna watch this stream from one of the raid leaders and we're gonna watch all the stuff about AQ, and then the next day they're not in the guild and we're like, what the hell
Yeah.
happened? Because we
And,
just had powwow time and now they're all gone.
to give more context to that, I remember, Brunt, that night, you know what happened that night, but one of the things that you had mentioned that night was the fact that, like, you were like, yeah, it feels like we're literally in the middle of a war right now.
Mm-hmm.
And once that decision was made, I remember we talked, and one of the things you said was, dude, I feel so relieved. I feel like we just won a battle in a war. Like, actually, and I reciprocate that feeling 100%. Like, I was actually, like, sweating that night. Like, physically exhausted and physically and mentally drained, waking up the next morning refreshed, and then I log on to Discord. I got messages from like 6 people with screenshots of people being demoted and kicked out of the guild. And it was just literal, just veritable relief drained through me when that happened.
I can kind of speak to that too, because I believe it was slightly after the decision was made. I was talking to Brun. Pardon one moment. Go ahead, Duncan.
No, that was it. That was all I had.
I think I know what you're referencing, Kagran, because when the decision was made, it was sort of a thing that spoke to the decision on Kagran as well, because the people who called for Kagran's demotion were kicked from the guild, which I think speaks to who is in the right and who is in the wrong. And I felt really bad about the demotion. That's one of the things that I've had a lot of guilt about, because I clearly know that I made a mistake in my judgment. I didn't have full information on everything, so it's kind of like trying to make the right call with what you know and what people are advocating for and all this. But yeah, like, how often do you need to apologize to someone was kind of a question that I had, because I said sorry to you a whole bunch of times for that, because I know you didn't deserve it, and it obviously must have felt like shit to be an officer and then be accused of being greedy and then being demoted from that. And shit, you learn a lot of lessons and you shoulder a lot of mistakes trying to lead people in this kind of capacity. And that was one of the mistakes that consistently gnawed at me over time, because I knew that I did the wrong thing, but I can't like undo it. So it was kind of up for you to forgive me and decide to stick with the gang.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised because honestly, like, Kagran and I talked a lot as like that was coming, because he's like, I'm pretty sure like all this shit just happened, I'm gonna be demoted, and he and I talked a lot more as this was happening, and then when it happened, and he's like, yeah, it happened, and he kind of gave me his point of view on it and details and stuff, and he was kind of like him and Han about, do I just stick around? Am I just gonna keep playing? And I was like, well, you know, you still have fun with us. Like, you know, we enjoy having you around. At least I do. You know, and I don't know if I was something that kept him around, but the fact that he stayed around was astounding to me and fought through it. And when we ended up restructuring, and I think we brought Sweaty up to an officer rank for a while until she stopped raiding, and I think it was just the 3 of us, and I had made mention again. I was like, yeah, you know, if you need an officer, like, I'm here, I'm happy to. I'm playing the game a lot more, you know, I'm not playing retail so much. But I said the first person that you should even talk to about becoming an officer is Kagran, because from the stories I've heard from not just Kagran, but from everybody's perspective, like, he got screwed out of that. And like, as I said that, Brunt and Tunkin are like, well, yeah, I mean, he's the first one coming back if he wants it. And I was like, that to me was like, we're headed in the right direction. I think we're going to be solid, you know, going into AQ, because I mean, Kagran's the last guy in the guild that's gonna try to start beef with somebody that isn't just flipping shit at somebody. He's the last guy that's gonna want to cause problems. He wants everybody to have fun. He wants everybody to show up. He wants people to enjoy playing the game. And I'm glad that he stuck around, and I'm glad that he's back. And it definitely makes his joking comments and my dad jokes that much worse. So it's great.
Love you, Kagran. There was another thing that happened around a similar time that was a bit of a returning to our origins, where we did a creation party, and Lajuni was a major force in this, and just wanting to like make an event that wasn't doing any of the raid content, but wanting to get everybody together, do some RP. She got a ton of fireworks and outfits and party favors and just different like zany effects and things that you can do in the game. And we all met outside Ogremar and dueled each other. We had a Boomkin boxing match where we got Brawn and Oak Sage, that's Minimalist Druid, to have fire waters and both be spec to Boomkin and just to like punch each other to see who would win. So it was like just trying to have fun with the different like random stuff that's in vanilla that's not related to rating or parsing or performance, but just like being immersed in the world and having fun and thinking about your character there. And that was one of the really nice breaths of fresh air that we got from a lot of new players to the game who had never played WoW before, who were really excited about the world and the cool stuff in it, like the different mounts you can get, the different like critter companions that'll follow you around and all that kind of cool stuff. And we RP walked around, and it was like a lot of the OG creation energy came back then.
Yeah, I mean, then Kagran and I had our Voidwalkers fight, and then we cheated. That was great. And then we went to Anixia, and Tem Shadow Priest tanked Anixia the entire time. Like, that was probably one of the funnest moments that I can remember of just the guild getting together to do something. It's probably the only thing that I think I have felt better, like more enjoyment out of the guild, is finally when we got to KT and killed him, and it was just we killed him. Like those are the two big moments for me. Like remembering back is our guild party and killing the final boss of vanilla.
We really haven't kicked almost anyone out of this guild, but
We've had, I think,
many?
exactly 2.
No, we've had a couple
few
random
more.
botters and stuff that
Yeah.
We've had some people that like they came in, were like, hey, like you need to like behave yourself because you're not behaving yourself, and they're like, oh, okay, and then the next day they were just even worse, and we're like, okay, goodbye. But I
guess
think the maximum amount is like 10 people total of like actual people.
Actual like rated with us, spent time with us, did
Yeah,
stuff.
I would say
Yeah,
of those
that's like
people,
3.
I think legitimately 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And they were, I'm pretty sure, all on that exact day.
Mm-hmm.
About a week before AQ came out.
Yeah, in AQ we had a bunch of turnover as well, but we still ended up performing surprisingly well. I think the first week, did we get twin imps the first week?
Yeah, we got Twin Imps week 1.
Yes. It was about 9 attempts until we got it, so it was definitely hard fought. But man, that was cool. And that was Patara Kagran tanked, right?
Yeah, Patara Kagran, and then it was you and
Yep.
Tebow week 1.
Yeah.
I do remember though that there was a warlock that raided with us most of the way through BWL Peekabee, and he was like so gung-ho since the beginning to twins tank, and I was like, what the hell is that? He's like, yeah, warlocks have to tank the twins, and I was like, oh, because like I never was max level, and he was so gung-ho about it. He got all this information. He's like, this is the gear you can get, this is the like different gear combinations, like these are the consumes you need, like everything down to like the exact talent spec you wanted. And they were going to give me the first tier, and I was, just because I was going to be one of the warlock tanks, and I was like, do not give me the first tier. Like, I have not put the effort in that Pickabee has put in for this. Like, give it to him first. And so the first tier went to him, which was what we were planning to do, and then I was like second or third tier because we were just like, yeah, the tanks need the tier. And so I got my tier, and then one day Pickaby just like vanished. He had like a GDKP run set up, and then like he didn't log in forever, and we're like, where did he go? And then we just didn't see any tiers forever, and we didn't know who was going to be the Warlock tank. And just before AQ came out, Kagran got a tier. I was like whispering all the Warlocks, like, this is the gear you need to get. Like, I didn't know who was going to be doing what. And come time for that, Kagran was the only other Warlock at the time with a tier, and he was pretty much geared for it. And we went in, and that was probably the scariest moment of my entire life. It's like, I'm going to totally fuck this up. I'm just going to totally mess this up. And after we killed it, like we wiped a few times, and it was, you know, a little stressful, and we killed it. I was like, oh, finally we've killed the boss that I'm terrified of. And I still, to this day, even though like I tank in the WP GDKPs, I still am just like, please don't mess up, because this is like the one boss that I just have to like not totally screw up.
Well, it's a dramatically more
easy.
technical fight for a Warlock compared to pretty much any other fight.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's also one of those things that if somebody else messes something up, it literally just spirals into hell, and it's just, it's one of those things that I can do just the smallest thing, like I'm just slightly too close, or I'm just slightly too far or something, and everything just explodes, and you have to like timing your res and everything like that, and it was terrifying to me. It's still terrifying to me, just because I want that fight to go so smoothly.
I don't know what Tara's talked about. That shit's easy, man.
I know, Mr. Parser over here on Twins tanking.
Dude, I'm getting like 60 or 70 parses as a Warlock tank now. I'm pumping.
Yeah, you're pumping. I just remember you're like, where's your greater firepower potion? I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean?
This leads into a good time to give Tazila a shout out too, because Tebow was our 2 tank for pretty much all of phase 1 through 4. And then phase 5 comes out. Raiding on the weekends was really bad for Tebow, so him looking for a weekday raiding guild was just better for his personal life, which is something I fully support. So we didn't have a 2 tank, and Tazila stepped up and ended up tanking Twin Imp successfully the very next week, when he was formerly a DPS warrior for us. So the story of the creation tanks has been pretty cool to see develop as well. I remember back in Blackwing Lair when Winter would tank Veil for me so I could hold the buffs past that. And also there was a pretty long period where Winter's threat gen was better than mine. Before I had Thunder Fury and was Fury Prod and stuff, the Bear with Crowd Pummeler is just way more threat, so the guild could zug more on Veil if he tanked it instead of me.
MCP is a hell of a drug.
Yep, we had Delete Master tanking for us. In the earlier phases, he took a break and then came back in Nax. Hyperion, another solid bear tank for us, who's part of Kel's group, which was a really substantial part of our raid roster for a long time. Much love to all of them. They ended up moving over to retail whenever Shadowlands came out, which was a really interesting thing that I think was a big mistake that Blizzard made. Just a very cruel choice for the content flow of dropping Nax and Shadowlands pretty much at the same time. And if you want to be on the cutting edge with either of those, you can't do the other one to the same extent, because Nax is the biggest committed raid that you have available. And then Shadowlands, if you want to hit level cap fast and then get gear and do the content there, you have to focus on that. So that would have been, what, November, December of last year?
Yeah. I remember that well too, because I transferred my retail paladin off of my classic account because I couldn't move Patara off of my retail account. So I could play both at the same time.
Who could that be, Mr. Metal Wrath?
Hell!
Hey,
Doomhammer.
Oh, Doomhammer's here
Hammer.
too. Hell yeah.
the Hammer.
Doomhammer.
Speaking of Kel's group,
Yeah. The only Sulfurus we've ever gotten in the guild. We could go over the legendaries quick, too, that we threw out.
Left. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, first, Thunder Fury, Blessed Blade of the Windseeker. Going to Brunt. That's kind of a no-brainer choice. As the main tank, you give it to them so that they can deal more threat, and the whole rest of the raid deals more damage. This item is bananas with how strong it is. Like, you get it in phase 3 or so, but the proc on it is so powerful and it deals so much threat. I think it's like 10 to 14% of my damage on some fights. It's just ridiculously strong. And it's interesting because whenever it was possible to make a TF, we're on Whitemane, so we're on the biggest server, and you see a whole bunch of them in the city, and you're like, oh, that shit, it's a dime a dozen. Are the drop rates super high or something? But what you don't think about are the guilds who didn't get one. They didn't get their other binding, and they're stuck on one. I know Dread Pirates is kind of a sister guild of ours. They have some former creation members, and they're also casual, so we progress at a similar pace to them in Nax. They didn't get a TF for their guild leader Zarek and main tank. He just hasn't gotten one, and that's a really interesting aspect of the game. Is there are some really cool items that you just straight up don't get dealt to you. Tebow got his TF pretty soon after me.
A total with the bindings that we picked up, it was 3.5 TFs.
Yeah. One of them went to
4.
Grace, who then finished hers outside of the guild when she joined Dinosaurs.
Yep.
And then we gained one from Alien joining us, and then we've had Valu and is it Veranak
Tazila.
who had the other binding before Tazila?
Well, Tazila.
It was Tazila, Valu, and I think Veranak had a binding, right? From
Mm-hmm.
Baron.
Something like that. Yeah.
So we have like, if you could just 2 bindings equal to Thunder Fury, we would have like close to 4.
Yeah,
I
Asher
think
has
5
one.
actually total.
Oh yeah, and then that's what it was. But yeah, we had a lot of Baron bindings, and Gar just doesn't care. So
Yep.
Yeah,
only
sure
they were
has one.
dropped as much as DFT did in the first week.
Dude, we
Few
had
weeks.
so many DFTs.
I remember we got DFT Rejuve, and then the next week we killed it and got DFT Rejuve, and we're like, is this supposed to be rare?
We loot counseled the Sulfurous Hand of Rag to Doomhammer, I believe, too.
Yes.
He was the only one who really wanted it to use it as well at that point.
Doomhammer, for reference, we had our boy Broken Helix as our enhanced shaman through phase 1, phase 2, I think part of phase 3. Kel's group came in and joined us in phase 3 or phase 4, and Doomhammer was their resident enhanced shaman. Broken Helix had to step away from the game, I think, due to real life stuff. And Doom kind of replaced Broken Helix as the enhanced shaman. And with all the effort and stuff that he put forward towards the guild and his awesome attitude and things like that, he was the one that when the Eye of Sulphurus dropped, we gave it to him. He was also the one out of that group that was promoted up to a Watcher rank, and he was on the second iteration of Loot Council as well. So
Yeah, we tried
Unfortunately,
to
We never saw one for him.
we tried to mix up the loot council a little bit the second time, where it included Watchers and Farseers, so it wasn't just Farseers giving Farseers loot. It was a question to Kel in the group of who do you think would be a really good and impartial loot council leader, and Doomhammer was nominated for that. And I think overall that iteration of loot council was pretty well done. There was a key mistake that I made. I guess it was kind of a group mistake too, but in one of our MCs, OSG dropped, and there was a sheet that we had of like who gets it next, but I think Braun wasn't there or something, and we didn't really. This is another.
I was the only person that had looked at the sheet, I think, because all the other loot council members were not there. And I think I was master looting.
Yeah, so it was our off day, so Sunday instead of Saturday, which meant we didn't have our usual core of who's doing the administrative stuff. And I was pulled into the conversation to see like who should get this OSG, and Kronax had come back at that time, and I was like, well, he's fantastic and he's going to make good use of it and stuff, and he doesn't really have good gear at the moment, so thinking about Kronax, not knowing that there's a sheet and we could just look at the sheet and see who gets it and hand him the loot. And that was part of a decision to remove LC entirely, just to streamline the loot distribution process and move us to full DKP, because we had gotten to a point with our loot system that it had so many rules to try to strive for like perfect distribution that it was so tangled that if you forget a rule here or there, you're going to end up making a mistake anyway. So it was too big of a tangled mess to be really efficient for time. So we ended up cutting DKP entirely. But that mistake was another one that I felt really bad about. It was supposed to go to Matt Champ, who was a really strong warrior that we had. He would be the kind of guy who would top the meters a whole bunch. And he definitely deserved it. I just totally forgot. He almost never talks in raid comms as well. And I think that can be a pretty strong bias that people develop with loot council decisions is you want to loot stuff to people who make themselves a lot more visible. So it's kind of like a popularity contest. If you're talking in comms a lot, people have you in their thoughts more because you're saying words at them. So whenever an item drops, you are more likely to think about them as opposed to someone who never talks and they just zug. But they deserve loot too. And man, loot is a really heckin' hard boss in this game.
Yeah, for sure.
Thankfully, heading into Nax, we did our squish and said no more loot council, and you put your price on the items.
Yeah, and
So
heading into Nax 2 was our rebuild phase 3. So we had a rebuild at the start of BWL, rebuild at the start of AQ, a big rebuild at the start of AQ. And going into Nax, most notably Kills Group and a few other people couldn't put in the time and commitment into Nax Primus, which was fine. And this time, though, we got a lot of ample warning. We were able to recruit people, and that transition was fairly good. And with the transition to full DKP, we were set out to go for the hardest raid in the game, for sure.
What a blessed system, DKP.
Yeah, and I want to give. Oh, go ahead, Lath.
I was just gonna say, you don't have to think about shit. Nobody has opinions about anything. You have numbers, and you just bid on what you want.
until the add-on doesn't round shit properly for everybody.
Perfect and beautiful add-on. Best system we've ever had.
Leg spikes, wonderful thing.
Yeah,
I just want to give a quick shout out to the former Dystopia members who kind of filled many necessary roles in our ranks in the transition into Nax. Krantic helped with the acquisition, merger, what have you, of a lot of the active raiding Dystopia members who are with us now, and just wanted to shout them out.
hell
Yep.
yeah. Alien UFO came in as like a really, really strong relief in the tank section because we lost Hyperion, who was a really strong tank for us. And he comes in with the TF and knows what he's doing. We had, Astrola as well, came from Dystopia.
Astrola, Catzilla.
Who is now
Tradege.
Tradege.
Yeah. Grape helped
Yeah.
for a few of the key early
Yep.
raids.
Yeah.
Until we could fill spots. Yeah.
I think we had, 7 or 8 people?
We had 7 or 8 people come from Dystopia. A lot of them still do raid with us on some of our, especially with our GDKBs. Amy, for example, Jaded.
Vic is.
Vic is. Yep.
Yep. Yeah,
So-
I just remember that because this was like week 2 of me actually doing roster because I wasn't really doing a lot of roster in AQ and it was more so in Nax. And I remember I'm like, I don't have like people, like where all the people go, everybody's leaving, I don't know who's going in. And then Saturday morning and there's like, I have 4 slots to fill and they're like 9 people. I'm like, what? I don't know what to do. And then so Tonkin and I were like scrambling to try to get people in and like figuring everything out. And some of the people that were promised they were coming in were like, we don't have a spot for you right now. And it just it was a shit show the first weekend. And thankfully they all stuck around. We got people rotated and eventually there were some people that were like, yeah, I'm quitting soon or I'm going to take a break, or they were just not showing up anymore. And so then all of a sudden we had room, but it was kind of scary with, we have 4 people that are leaving. We have another person that's leaving. We had 2 people that just decided they weren't going to show up anymore without words for a while. And we're just like, a third of the raid is gone. And what are we going to do? So it was a little concerning once again coming into a new raid. But then all of a sudden there's all these people that are like, heck yeah, like our guild's not going anywhere and we want to raid. And they popped over and it's been a wonderful backbone in our core raid. Like most of them were geared on their character they wanted to bring. A couple of them changed from what they were brought in as, and a lot of them were geared and very knowledgeable of what they were doing. And it's been a refresher to not have to teach new people. But
Well-
it's been fun too because they filled in a lot of the holes we needed desperately that we'd been struggling with for a long time, specifically shamans.
Yeah. Resto shamans. Really,
Yeah.
really powerful for the raid. This also kind of points to some people who we brought into Nax who were not geared and not experienced. And
WP gang?
WP
Yes.
gang, who we thought were a bunch of multi-boxers or something.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So I can tell
Yeah.
I can tell the story of WP gang joining the guild. So Shibby, shout out to Shibby, whose raid times and such couldn't work with us that well anymore, and he was raiding with a different group. He sends me a message like, "Hey, there's this group of like 4 or 5 random dudes who like this messaged me after grouping saying, hey, can we join the guild?" And it's like, I don't know if you want to talk to them first, if you want to vet them, something like that. And so it was it Zaddy or Indo? I can't remember who I talked to first. I never remember which of the two it was. Indo, was it you? I think it was Indo.
It was one of the two of them.
I talked to
They've talked to
Zaddy
me
first.
before.
He was
But,
described to me as the de
chat with
facto
him.
leader.
Yeah, it was Indo. Yeah, I remember right. But he's like, hey, we have this group. We're a shaman, a warrior, a mage, and a hunter. I'm like, okay. Raid slots are kind of weird. We might not have a slot for all of you. I don't know if that's amenable, et cetera, et cetera. Gave them the little spiel. And G invited Indo first when they agreed they wanted to join. Then he's like, oh, wait, they're going to get on. And it's just like, add this person, another one gets on, add this person. And it's like, how many of these guys are there? They're all named WP. What the fuck's with that? And so I actually asked before I G invited them what it meant, just to be like, is there some weird stuff going on here? Like, want to make sure it's clear. But yeah, it's wasted potential. All of these guys, they never live up to anything. And G invited them, and they were just getting geared. They were running some GDKPs, help get themselves some gold, get themselves some gear along the way.
I do remember somebody said, they said something not so great in a dungeon run, and we're like, hey, you should be behaving yourselves. And we're like, oh, and I was like, these guys ain't gonna last. That
Yeah,
was,
it was-
That's how wrong
like,
we
I
were.
don't know who these guys are, but they're causing problems already. That's not a good indication. But,
Yeah,
oh man.
Awesome.
yeah. But thankfully, they've Fuquan specifically, it was probably him, have settled down, and they've been very strong members ever since.
He was worse than he is now.
They've
Dude.
done a huge amount for the guild with the rise of us running GDKPs and stuff, and I mean us as in them. WP Gang has hosted MCs and AQ40s primarily, also a bunch of odd ZGs and this and that. And they're very, very well done. All the rules and stuff are clearly posted. They take care of all the admin and stuff, so I would just show up with Brunt and tank and raid lead a lot of these different things. But yeah, really an amazing group of friends who, they're all IRL buddies who went to school growing up together and they decided to play Classic together. So that's an interesting aspect of these vanilla Classic raids is you can have pretty large friend groups. And if you have room in the raid roster, they can all raid together, which is a really fun experience.
Let me ask a question then to all of you guys. Since we're nearing the end of Classic WoW, it is only 2 weeks out before we actually step through this portal and go into the Burning Crusade. I don't know if we want to talk about the raids more specifically, but one question I definitely want to think about and talk about is what is each of your just favorite moments of the game so far? Doesn't have to be raiding, doesn't have to be with the guild, just what has been the best thing, the most fun thing that you've done in all of Classic WoW.
Well, since I have to dip in a few minutes, I'll just jump in really fast. Killing KT has, from being pre-raid 60, coming through the whole experience, the whole game in creation, and killing the first boss in MC to the last boss in Nax, just the whole environment of raiding with the guild and the guild itself has been a wonderful thing. I've loved almost every minute of it, but I still think my my Scholomance with Tonkin has to be at the very top of my list because it's just, to me, it was like the beginning of him and I being really good friends because we just went through so much awful crap at the very beginning trying to get him through because he was a little bit lower level than everybody, and just we ran into a tank that later would join the guild a little bit in phase 1 and just kind of was like, I want this, I want that, and we're like, that's not how any of this works. And then he left because he didn't get what he wanted, and we're like, okay. And it was a very interesting experience, but definitely something that I will remember for a very long time, just because it was so early on, and kind of like I said, a start of a really good friendship with Tunkin. So that's
Tunkin,
probably
you want to go
my
next?
closest one.
Yeah, I can go next. Three things stand out for me. Number one was
Sorry,
the
Lynn.
creation.
Sorry.
Okay, it's all good. One thing was the first creation guild meeting that we had in game when we were all like level 40 or something like that. Everyone showed up, and I was the only hunter that showed up. So I was made hunter class lead because I was the only one that showed up.
By default.
And, by default. So that, no question about it. I was the only one. That was pretty funny. Another one would be the honestly, the first week of AQ40, and we went in there, and we had been gathering nature resistance gear for months. We've been talking about it, hyping up Hoo Run like this big guild killer. It's gonna be the worst fight in AQ. It's gonna be like a big wall, and we go in there with all this nature resist gear on, and we just one shot Hoo Run, and no one dies. Um, which was just like I just remembered it was like such a relief. The third one would be on a bit more of a personal note. There was a night that happened before all the stuff in BWL kind of culminated. That I was in a call with Bronson Winter. That was from a different side of things, probably one of the best things that could have happened. Was making sure that I had a full grasp of that situation, understanding what was going on there. Not to tell all tales, but I was on a kind of a different perspective on all that type of stuff from most people. So that was a kind of a difficult night for me, but that was like the night where everything was set free, and I felt relieved. And I was, since then it's been just a joy. And then the last one would definitely also be just killing KT. We did it.
Lath?
There's been like so many just awesome things. I have two in particular that really come to mind. The first one was honestly grinding to 60. As kind of taxing as that was, it was just such a fun experience. It was the first time playing World of Warcraft with Neuro, who's become a really good friend of mine, and that was just a super super fun time going through dungeons and grinding through as like a full party, getting gear and getting upgrades and trying to be as optimal as possible. I remember we would set sleep schedules because we all wanted to log on around the same time and try to start doing dungeons again. So we would get off of the game after playing for like 24, 25, 26 hours and go, okay, well, I'll wake up in like 4 hours from now and we'll log back in and we'll play. So that was just such a fun time. I'm looking forward to doing, hopefully not as grindy in TBC, but something similar again. That's going to be so much fun. The second, which is more personal to me and sort of the story of my character, was the first Upper Blackrock Spire run we did. That's special to me for two reasons. Number one is we killed the first boss of that kind of 10-man dungeon, if you will, and realized, hey, like this is kind of where more important loot is going to be being distributed. We're going to do Molten Core, and we can't just have like, there could be trolls, all that sort of stuff. So that's where Brunt said, hey, does anybody want to be Loot Master? And I was like, I could probably do that. That sounds fine. Like, whatever. I just have to click people's names. So that was the first time I was ever loot master for creation, and I've been loot master for the guild ever since. And big shout out to Patara for covering when I'm not here or giving me a a break on some weeks. So it's been really nice.
And thank you for teaching me all the things that I am too scared to break.
No worries. It's been quite a trip being loot master, but it's been a fun contribution that I can do for the guild. So I'm really happy to do it, and I'm honestly still happy to do it. Also, what happened in that Upper Blackrock Spire was I got my first epic of the game, which was, again, it was the first run we ever did of Ubers, and I got a Fell Striker. A Fell Striker dropped, and I don't think everyone quite realized exactly what had happened because they saw it as an epic, but I actually realized, like, this is a very rare weapon. This never drops. This is exceedingly rare, and I pushed really hard. I'm like, guys, I like really, really, really want this. I still have it. I still own it. It's in my bank, and it'll never go out of my bank. But you know, I became loot master like 5 minutes before Fell Striker dropped, and I assigned it to myself. So it's been working out ever since. So it's perfect.
Go. Yeah. The question is though, did that set you onto being daggers over swords?
100%.
Were you wanting swords before?
I thought daggers were kind of cooler because it was like the alternative route for rogues to be, and that was something that was kind of big in loot acquisition for World of Warcraft. Is the less people who want your weapon, the higher chance you'll have of getting it, right? So Death Sting is a really big item, for instance, but not a whole ton of people want it because it's not like a sword. So definitely getting Fell Striker did put me on that path, and then Molten Core. The two big like rogue weapons that dropped in there were Perdition's Blade and Corehound's Tooth. So both of those were daggers, and I was like, oh yeah, this just makes sense. And then as we entered BWL, that's where we kind of had the more sweaty approach going forward. And the other rogue officer that was here was like, well, let's have 2 swords and 2 daggers. And I was like, okay, well, I already have daggers, so I guess I'll be a daggers rogue. Like, that's fine. And she was a swords rogue, and so we just kind of split it like that. I never switched. But sadly or fortunately, I don't know which one, I will be switching to swords for Burning Crusade, because that's just not really a thing. But yeah, Fell Striker, cool. Such an amazing and cool experience for me. I was like, this is a baller.
Braun, did you want to go next?
Yeah, it's hard not to say the first Kel'Thuzad kill, but I would probably agree with last leveling through 60 was super fun for me, healing through all the dungeons and getting to the raids and not knowing which content we'll be able to clear at 60, but then finally doing it and killing Kel'Thuzad. Also, the quest to slay the demon at Atish at the end of all of this is
that
a really
was cool
good way
to watch.
Sort of, yeah, finish off our journeys together. But just discussing what we're going to do and what we wanted the guild to be before Classic even launched, and then seeing how it's all come through to the end. The picture as a whole is probably one of the best parts of
it.
So this isn't really one moment, but kind of a thing I was talking about with a few people in voice chat the other day. Involves like first kills as well, because that's like, you hear me on the comms and the VODs. I'm the loudest let's fucking go whenever we first kill a boss. But one thing I kind of like about Classic is sometimes you can look at the gear you have and see all the different places you've been and beat. So in my case, I don't have anything for MC because like fuck MC, but
you got T1, dude.
I have Tyr from Nefarian, the last boss of BWL. I have Ring of the Fallen God from Cthulhu, and as of a couple weeks ago, I have Mark of the Champion off KT. And just like seeing the progression through those and seeing them on your character is just kind of a unique thing that you don't always get. And yeah, it just is very nice.
My up.
Looks like you're left.
Well, I'll shout out what people were saying in raid chat with the 46 Firemaw kill to explain that fight. So there's a certain situation that can happen when you have a boss that you've killed before, but the fight ends up being so close that it's really epic, even though you've killed it once. We had 46 people in the Fire Maw fight, and that includes soul stones and onks, because whenever I went down, the boss was low enough that if other people were really focused on fighting it, we could potentially kill it, but it just wouldn't go down. There was still a little bit of health left, and we ended up having all the shaman who were there pop their onks, and soul stones were popped, and everyone's just trying to get whatever little bit of damage they can. And Broken Helix, the orc shaman, he ended up taking the name Firebane because he was the last onk to pop up, and he stared down Firemaw in the face and frost shocked that motherfucker and killed him. And that was just ridiculously epic how close some of the fights can be, and it really shows like using more of the full breadth of your class. When you get into chaotic situations, it's a lot less about using just whatever your most spammable ability is and using a lot more of those utility spells that you don't normally use in your rotation, but it's just to be able to survive that kind of a fight. So that was a key moment that a lot of us remember. Another one that was kind of a behind the scenes thing, seeing Winter in the raid here and thinking of that, was a lot of the weeks when we really weren't sure about the fate of the guild and things were looking pretty grim, like when we were short-handed, when some people were unhappy, when we're dealing with the consistent complaints and things like that, and just the support that we provided to each other, leading the guild through a lot of the less glamorous phases where our parses were not good, our roster was not looking super healthy, the Discord was pretty quiet, and just trying to keep the ship moving. And that connects pretty powerfully with the way that the KT kill felt for me. It was about like 10 to 15% health in KT, and then I looked up at the raid frames and it looked like enough, and that was a really incredible moment of just feeling like, holy shit, I've been able to tank the whole game and got to show the guild this content, which was, it was a question mark. Like, progressing through Nax is hard. 4 Horsemen is very hard. From a game design perspective, expecting 40 people to all coordinate with a unique route that they have to take, and if they mess it up, then more people die in the fight every rotation from, say, Thane's Meteor. It's really tough stuff, and I feel like they don't make games like this anymore that require this amount of preparation. You have so many consumes and buffs and gold and time that you have to pour into your character just to be ready for raid, and then you get into the raid and everyone needs to do their job and pay attention. It's some really tough stuff, so it felt like there was a lot of pressure on me to be able to get the guild through the content before BC came out and kill KT. So killing KT was both triumphant and a massive relief, where it feels like, whew, we made it. We made it through the game. We had a lot of turnover every phase. A lot of guilds didn't make it through Classic. Phase 6 was a major guild killer because of Shadowlands coming out and just the holiday season at the same time. So for us to ride out the storm that happens at the end of every phase and recover and change a little bit, like with the ship at Theseus, the guild changes as people come and go. But we ended up preserving the spirit of the guild until the very end. The killing of KT without buffs was another very major thing for our morale and just the excitement and the memory. I was saying to some people that I'm going to be a old heckin' grandpa and joking with Braun and Lath and the rest of y'all about us killing KT without buffs back in the day. And I want to shout out Cal Classic a little bit there, because he's someone who has believed in the team regardless of our prep and our buffs. And referencing the loot meme for him, the poor guy, we never got a heckin' axe off Cthulhu, not a single one this entire video game. We never saw a single corrupted Ashbringer the entire time. We never saw a two-hander off KT, though we haven't killed him a ton of times. But the experience in this game is pretty random, and it feels jagged and heavy, but it's really rewarding when everyone comes together and they accomplish something really awesome. Another kill that comes to mind that felt amazing for me was our first Loatheb kill without buffs. That one felt like another progression kill, because we killed Loatheb with buffs one time, but Loatheb is one of the most technical healer fights and DPS fights, because you have to manage when people get the spores and all this. And we had a stroke of brilliance. I don't know if it was Tuncon's idea or Kiwi's idea, but switching the healers plus the tank to be in a different voice channel. And we used that tactic for both Loetheb and Four Horsemen, because you don't really need to hear what the other group is doing. You can just focus on your job there. But that one felt really good. And just those close fights, I think winning a close fight in Classic where everyone really gets a little bit extra focused, you're that much more jacked in, and really trying your best to make it happen with the people you have there, those kills are really, really satisfying. So shout out to Kiwi and Apple for being an incredible healing lead for us. A lot of the blocking that was done for some of the key fights, people in raid chat mentioned Ragnarok Cat helping us with our first Ragnaros kill by getting people to spread out and stand in good spots. And then for Sapphiron and KT, we ended up killing those pretty fast compared to Four Horsemen, I think largely because we got some assigned seating of you're standing here and then we can just run to the ice blocks and survive through various stuff. But yeah, it's been a ridiculously awesome journey. The game takes a ton of time, and a lot of the time is about the interactions and the relationships between people. And that was one of the things that as a guild leader I did a lot of, is having those conversations with people outside of raid, maybe outside of game, just figuring out where they are, what they want for the guild, and then trying to find what is our best way forward for the people that we have. And it was a rude awakening in some senses. I definitely had a lot more of a dreamy view of what guild leadership would be like, of, oh yeah, they're going to be shit tons of people and we're just going to face roll the content and it'll be a bunch of StarCraft people kicking ass and having a good time. But with the way that Classic actually went, the game is sweatier than we expected. The PvP is a lot more vicious and toxic than we expected the battles and skirmishes to be. So a lot of people quit as a result of that. And honestly, the fights are pretty hard. I'm kind of surprised at like how hard they decided Nax would end up being as a raid. And very few people saw it back in the original Vanilla WoW, but we heckin' killed KT more than once.
No buffs.
Without buffs.
6 times now, I think.
Or a crutch. We don't need
Yeah.
those. We killed KT with no buffs. It was fine. No problem.
It was
As the game
third attempt?
intended to be played as.
Third
attempt, yeah. The first attempt we
Yeah.
went in with buffs, saw phase 3. Second attempt we went in with no buffs, saw phase 3. Third attempt we went in with no buffs and killed it.
Yeah, between pull 2 and 3, we were like, well, we can go rebuff in 10 minutes, but let's do a pull before then, and then we just...
And then we
no
just killed it.
problem,
Didn't even need a
Yeah,
rebuff.
It was like probably our smoothest KT kill ever. It's been
Yeah.
gotten worse since then.
Yeah, so 6 KT kills total.
But it's definitely been a fun journey for me since even before joining the guild, and I wasn't a big follower of Brunt beforehand. I had watched him when I was kind of getting into StarCraft, and I was like, oh, he's playing World of Warcraft Classic, me too. And I just watched him while I was leveling, and then at one point he's like, yeah, I'm on white main. I was like, oh shit, I'm on white main too. And I joined and have been here since then, and I've loved almost every minute of it. I mean, of course, you know, there's always those days, but I'm glad that I landed where I landed, and I'm hoping that it will continue into TBC just as strong, even stronger.
I just asked in the raid chat for people to post what phase they joined us. A lot of phase 1 people. Phase 3 people.
Yeah, I'd also, just a shout out to, there's some people that we were, if you look back on this first 3 or 4 logs of MC, there's a good 15 or 20 people that are still on those logs on KT and in Nax Ramus. The people that stuck it out the entire time, the entire officer corps is all part of that group, but there's just a whole bunch of people. It's been like 2 years almost. Pretty close
It's
to 2
wild
years.
to think about that.
And yeah.
I've had a couple moments of gratitude. Uh, it happens whenever I'm farming shards and stuff on my warlock, and it's part of the way that I can make the time more fun. Is every shard that I farm is for a raider who chose to be in this guild, and if you don't have the people, you can't run the raids, even if you think you're hot shit and you maybe can play your character well. You need to have other people agree to step through that instance with you, attuned and prepared and ready to fight for hours. So I'm really, really grateful for everyone who's raided. I know sometimes people, they're raiding and they don't talk a whole bunch, so maybe they don't get as much time in the spotlight as other people, but people like TLRA, Sammy, who've been raiding since phase 1, Phobia as well, really solid raider, also gives me a ton of health stones. I appreciate all the health stones from the warlocks. I don't always say thank you for those, but they're very delicious and help me stay alive.
You always ask at the worst time too. We're full mana out to pull, and you're like, trade. I'm like, okay, more mana.
So I think the warlocks have been like the most stable part of the roster since BWL.
Yeah, warlocks. We've had
Warlocks
turnover
and
on.
Yeah.
Hunter. I think we've only lost one hunter, and that was
Or,
Kel.
yeah, minus Kel plus Zaddy.
Yeah,
And then
I
sometimes
think the
Arrow can
hunters
come
were
in
a
too.
little bit more stable than the warlocks, but those were the two spots.
Half the rogues have been here since the first MC. So
True.
That's true. There were only 2 rogues in the first MC, but no, I'm kidding.
And then we had like 17 rogues at one point trying to get in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, we
Yeah.
don't have room for you, sorry.
Yeah,
As we
hunters.
look at our 9 mages.
Hunters, it's only been like 7 of us. It's me and Raptor Jesus in phase 1 and 2. Me, Sit, Asterin, and Kel sticking it all the way out through AQ. And then Zaddy and Arrow Shooter coming in with Nax here. So not a whole ton from us.
Creation warriors strong. Brunt Neferton Mistrun needs a toll more the Mistrun tribe. Tazila.
2 tank for a lot of the AQ stuff and into Nax, Alien UFO. And then we have Kassikar, Kronax, who are both able to zug or to tank really well. Super strong players. Cow Classic, the RP warrior. We were talking about items that show where your character has gone. Kalimdor's Revenge was probably the item that he got the most excited about from an RP standpoint. That was after we killed Twin Imps the first week, and we got that. It's not a great sword if you're comparing it to like stuff that's technically BIS, but it looks really cool, and it says that your guild killed Twin Imps, so just him being immersed in the world of fighting against the Karaji Empire and stuff. Cow Classic came from Sneck Gang, which was a group of guys who did a little bit of RP and stuff in the game, which made me feel better about being in character as Brunt. I guess that's the big elephant in the room, is that I RP my character's voice a lot of the time, and that makes a lot of the interactions kind of interesting, that you're talking to Brunt or Neuro. It's less kind of clear. Am I talking to the Tauren or the leader of the guild? So thanks for entertaining me with all this and letting me be Brunt.
So I wasn't familiar with you at all when I joined the first pug that led to me joining the guild. I was like, dude, what the fuck is with this guy? Because that is real voice. What's going on? I was so like bewildered by it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to roll on Grobulus initially, but then people were like, no, RP server, it's like Goldshire Inn, right?
The grobby lobby, dude.
Yeah.
Yikes.
We're almost
Yeah.
there. RP PvP.
Do you remember in the creation survey too? I think didn't you have a question? How do you like Brunt as a RP thing, or was that on something else?
No, it was on that survey. It said, do you think
Yeah.
there should be more or less Brunt? And I think it leaned slightly toward more.
Yep. There were definitely some people that have been vocal about that, but it's one of those. I think it's one of those hidden membership fees. Like, yeah, Brunt's gonna be Brunt. That's fine. Got to
You
deal
will
with that.
hear weird Ragnaros voices in RP happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Moving into.
I
TV.
really hope.
Strong
Oh,
guild.
go ahead.
I was just saying we're moving into Burning Crusade with a really strong guild.
Yep.
Yeah.
We are planning on posting some more firm TBC plans soon for all the guildies out there. Tunkin's working on that. We're scheming behind the scenes to get that info for you.
Yep, it's gonna be a little hard. We can't control how people level. Not gonna tell people how to level. So probably the first few weeks is gonna be a bit hectic and chaotic. But once people get leveled up to 70, we can see exactly what classes we've got. It's gonna be a fun time. For
Tier
sure.
4 will definitely be a big figuring it out period, because just the raids are weirdly formatted for a whole raid tier, and there's a lot of changes and a lot of new viable specs and 25 people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's start walking back.
Yep, let's go. There's demons out there, Lath. I can't stealth. Can you
Yep. See you later, bud. Good luck.
help me out, bud? Shroud of Concealment, is that in the game?
Can't you just control those?
We got
demons, though?
tanks.
Let me see. I don't know if I can slay this guy.
Enslave Mana Hound.
T-Bow's here. What's up, dude?
Ebo
All right.
Baggins.
All right, I'm trying to enslave it. Oh, immune. Oh shit.
Asterin has been leading PvP stuff on Sundays. A lot of y'all were doing PvP before we started the Story of Creation here
Oh,
today,
we pulled a
so
lot. We're gonna die.
no, we're fine.
We're not. We're fine.
The skull, guys.
Skull X Triangle Square. Torn War Stomp. How did so many get pulled?
I don't know.
They chain pull.
I'm gonna vanish. Actually, I'm gonna take the.
I'm out of mana.
Oh man, and this
Oh,
was
you
the end
guys.
of the guild.
Well, shit. This is the announcement. This is where we go, and we're announcing that creation is not walking into the dark portal.
Does anyone have a soul stone?
I should have gotten a health stone, Brunt.
Shit, we wiped.
Ah, dang it.
But yeah,
We,
I know there's a
we
lot of
entered the
people
portal
asking.
as we left it, dying.
I know there's a lot of questions as well asking about what our plans are going from 40 to 25, or how we're gonna be working with that. Details coming soon. We have we're working on a whole big write up. So
Trying to make everybody happy.
yeah,
think-
that's hard.
Good conclusions to reach that end, though.
If you haven't
Yeah.
filled out the form in upcoming alerts, if you're planning on raiding with us, we appreciate if you fill that out so we can get as much info as possible going forward.
Pre-patch is Tuesday, so a bunch of people can
Oh,
make
shit.
their blood elves and stuff, and also people can boost a character to 58, which is not a blood elf.
How
Yep,
much should
no
I sell
paladin boosting.
summons to Orgrimmar for
5 gold.
all these fresh elves?
5G?
Raid day is still
yeah.
planned on Saturdays, so our main 25-man hosted raid will be. With the Phase 1 stuff, it's just going to be Gruul, Magtheridon, Karazhan, so the Karazhan runs we can probably just roll throughout the week, because a lot of people want to run on multiple characters, and it's 10-man.
Yep, 10 mans. It's we're looking for a few people that are willing to lead their own. For example, WP gang hosted Karazhan, or a maybe like a Temrir soft res Karazhan. It's only 10 people, so that'll mostly be on your own, and then Gruul and Magtheridon. It's kind of going to be, for everyone who's playing now, it's going to be a step back. There's 3 raids that we need to clear, and it's going to take us, if you get good at it, less than 4 hours to clear them all. It's going to be like back in Phase 1 or Phase 2, when we could do MC and PWL in one day and we'd be done. You just get your ZGs done whenever. It's going to be pretty much the same thing. We'll get Magtheridon and Gruul's Lair done on Saturdays, and you can just get your Karazhan done whenever. A lot less raiding, a lot less stress, a lot more fun, hopefully. No world
Max
buffs.
gear really helps in Tier 4 as well. The original release schedule had both Tier 4 and Tier 5 out at the same time. You just had to do one to get attuned for the other. Without that, there's kind of a dearth of full raids. There's barely any trash on the 2 raids that are there. So short raid days, but we want to set expectations and get everything kind of established going into tier 5 as bigger, more full length raids, I should say.
The amount of content in vanilla is pretty crazy. In Phase 6, for a lot of weeks, on Brunt I would do Nax, AQ40 with WP Gang, Blackwing Lair with Arrow Shooter, and then MC with WP Gang. And then sometimes an odd ZG or so here or there, which is a whole bunch of lockouts. And then I would go to Temrir's Thursday, Blackwing Lair on Demonaz. So there's just so much that you can do in this game. It's going to be pretty different with BC coming out, but it'll be more leveling focused. People are going to want to get their characters to 70, and then there are heroics that you can do, which do take a good bit of time. This is all from memory, but I remember heroics being pretty different from regular dungeons in the sense that stuff hits really, really hard. So your classes that have CC are going to be wanting to use them a lot more than just zugging everything down and doing AoE and stuff. And rogues can go back into stealth after sap, dude.
Sap, dude, what?
Yeah, it gets a lot easier with Nax gear. Oh lord.
No, we only got one group of them this time.
Yeah, but Nax gear makes it a lot easier. Nax gear is basically equivalent to heroic / tier 4 gear in a lot of cases. So, yeah.
Okay, who pulled?
That was LG. Oh, AoE hit me. I'm trying to hearth here.
Every person for themselves.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't think we had really anything else that we were gonna go over, so.
There will be plenty of time for discussion and questions once we get the info out for TBC.
Mm-hmm.
If we make any terrible mistakes, feel free to call us out on it.
Yep. No one's perfect at this, and a lot of us also haven't rated TBC, so.
For the really major stuff, I really love votes. That's something that I've learned from leading creation, because votes oftentimes will surprise you with the outcome. You can have a group of officers who are all in a meeting and they all have a very clear opinion that it should be this certain way, and it seems like an obvious no-brainer call to make. And one of the light bulb moments for me was whenever we did a watcher vote, I think, of whether or not we should add a DKP incentive for people getting world buffs or something. And the vote was almost 100% against, when all the Farseers at the time thought that it was a really brilliant idea. So getting the guild's opinion is something that is a thing we'll continue with moving forward. We don't know every single person's perspective, and your opinion is fully valid because you're a raider who's hustling and pulling weight, and we can't do the raids without you. So thanks.
Also, the Tonka Patara Kagran group is going to be the first one to hit 70 fight me.
Oh,
Yeah,
Hundo Pete.
right, buddy. Good luck.
I'm just
Not
saying,
happy.
we have Totem, and Totem is Australian.
Totem is the best healer in the game. Fight me.
Yeah,
Braun.
you have Brawn, but
And
druids and dungeons? Ugh.
Secret Biss, dude.
Dude, we have 2 warlocks. Warlock's
Double
pub.
Warlock.
Double warlock and a hunter.
And a
Best
hunter.
3 DPS classes in the game.
Only if you guys actually know how to play.
Dude, did you see me on Saffron? Come on, get out of here.
Do y'all have
Only Sammy
a
beat me
favorite
up 'cause
boss
he
fight
cheated.
to do regularly?
Not Viscidus. Anything but Viscidus.
Yeah, agreed. Viscidus, definitely the worst boss fight in Classic.
You boss.
My favorite boss is Brunt.
Hell yeah.
My favorite boss. Maybe Saffron.
Not Patchwork. Not Dump Your Load the boss.
Nah, he's a little boring, actually.
Syria Leon's card, that's a good one.
Nah, he's too RNG. No, I think Saffron. Saffron's super cool. No, you know what? Actually, I changed my answer. Veil Straws. Veil was a fun one.
Really?
Yeah. Because it was like, as a rogue, you could really min-max that fight with how efficiently you use your Vanish. Because it was always like, don't pull threat, don't pull threat. If you pull threat, you're going to kill everybody. And so that just felt like it was a fight actually made for rogues to just pump as hard as they could.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like mechanically interesting but not stupid fights. Like KT is mechanically dense, but it's a very engaging boss. And it's the last boss, so like it gets some credit just from that.
Say from a raid leading perspective. Oh man. I think Oro was an interesting fight, honestly. Because a lot of the time, literally, it's the tank MO was Zug Zug and get as much red as you can. And Oro was one of those fights that really put that to the test. The other one I would say is Four Horse. Like, for as much flack as people give it, and as many times as we half wipe on that every single week, like, man, Four Horse is fun. It's like you have to pay attention, and you are responsible for what you need to do. And seeing the guild work like a well-oiled machine, at especially like before we have to get into the back half of it, is it's super fun.
In terms of raw difficulty, it's probably the hardest boss.
Definitely the hardest boss from a
Yeah,
personal
that's-
standpoint. There are
We were
fights.
stuck on that for the longest.
There are fights that I think are more difficult for a particular role. Like for me, it's the main tank. Four Horsemen is not the most technical challenge. There are other fights that are more pressure on me. But for your average raider, that's one where every single person needs to know their route. So everyone has a specific assignment that is more technical than most other fights.
Yeah. That's a thing about, as a Warlock tank, Twin Emps is super interesting just because it's very different than any other fight as a Warlock. It's like talking to Indo and people who've picked it up like later on in the content tiers. They always mention just like how interesting that fight is and like how different it is. It's stressful, but at the same time, it's something very different than what you're used to.
Mm-hmm. I really like Veil. It's one of the fastest tempo fights in the game. Is the tank you put on a 1.3 speed dagger so you can heroic strike. And every single time I do it, even in the GDKPs and stuff where it's with pugs, I get an adrenaline rush before the fight starts because you have that like 30 to 40 seconds to prep and you want to make sure all of your stuff is lined up. Berserker stance, Blood Rage, Berserker Rage, you get your Battle Shout, you get your Death Wish, right with the last 10 Rage, and then you go Defensive Stance after you get your Recklessness and Death Wish, Kiss of the Spider, and then you hit Heroic Strike and Bloodthirst and Revenge as fast as you can for the whole fight. And it's short, super intense, really, really fun. Nefarian is also very fun and technical, especially for Horde side, because you have to stance. So you have to watch out for the Bellowing Roar, and then you have class calls that, as the tank, you have lots of different stuff to do. Turning the boss for the rogues, using defensive stuff if it's a warrior call. I like Nef a lot. Patch is really fun. Loetheb definitely feels like tons of pressure as the tank, which is fun. Hagen is also really good mechanically because you're moving the boss constantly.
Having rated as both melee and ranged DPS now on Iron, the Nax fights, like, it's so different between ranged melee. I haven't played the healer perspective, but even there, it's probably like Loetheb is like, as a DPS, Loetheb is, I'm going to hit Shadow Bolt and crit 100% of the time and deal 1300 DPS. But as a healer, it's like, okay, gotta wait for my turn, be ready, get some DPS in, make sure I'm consuming right. It's a very cool fight, very cool. Like Loetheb is, it's obviously very restrictive mechanically, but there's something about the bosses where you get a power level increase throughout. Like Thaddeus, for example, like just ripping fat crits on Thaddeus, like, oh, I hit almost a 16,000 Shadow Bolt, or a fight like Patrick where it's about the sustained DPS, or Loetheb where everything's a crit. It's very interesting.
Or it's like Chromagus where we get 3 shadow phases in a row in the last 20% and do 1.2k DPS.
Get 99s, yeah.
Yes, that was one of my favorite raid bosses.
Yeah. Except if there's time lapse. Fuck time lapse.
Yeah.
Our I took a look. Our first Chromagus took us 9 kills. If I
9
remember, we
attempts?
had the 9 attempts. 9th one we killed it.
I
And that
think
was
that was the 1 week of
time lapse.
BWL I missed. Was week
Yeah.
2.
Yeah, that was a time lapse plus corrosive, I think.
That boss is still hard. He killed me this last week in Arrow's run because he did the fire breath for 7.6k, and then he did a melee hit right after that. So it's pretty cool how a lot of the fights are still consistently pretty hard. I've seen like Nax level tanks who still fail at Fire Maul in phase 6 just because it's such a tricky and technical fight and easy to mess up. So I think a lot of the boss design in the game is pretty fun. There are some face roll bosses throughout every raid tier, but
Yeah.
Shout out to Fankris.
yeah.
Oh, I fucking love Fankris just because I don't have to think about anything. It's a patchwork in that
Yeah.
thing, except sometimes you get web wrapped and get screwed.
Shout out to Ebonrock, Flame Gore,
Loot
Trying to even
pinatas
think.
all around.
Aw.
Patchwork for range DPS.
Oh, patchwork it's all I have to do is when do I tap, when do I pot. I don't have a cooldown
Yeah,
because I have
optimize
markdown.
rotation, exactly. Max DPS, Zug Zug, world buffs.
Well, I'm gonna take off, guys. Fun reliving all these memories with you all.
Yeah,
I'll catch you guys later.
it's a
Catch you
shame
in TBC.
how mechanically simple MC bosses are, all things considered.
Yeah.
They all have one mechanic, but that makes sense as the first raid created in Classic. A lot of mistakes were made and a lot of just like things they never repeat because they're just annoying. But it's a good place to build off of when you get into the mechanically dense AQ and Nax, just like going forward.
You guys mentioned Varanak in his face desk Ragnaros.
It was mentioned in chat a couple times.
We did a drinking
Yeah.
game MC, which in hindsight may have been a mistake because people, as the raid went on, got more and more drunk, and then we get to Ragnaros, and our guild wasn't that strong that we could defeat Ragnaros totally plastered. So
No, I think we had
Well,
only killed
and-
Rag like once.
yeah,
That week too, I think Lath wasn't there, so Faf was doing loot, and then he was so drunk that like we're like Lath or Faf, there's a belt back on the trash outside Sulfuros, and then like he got mad because he was so drunk, and then like logged off, and then he came back, and then like the item was gone, but yeah, we had some pretty intoxicated people when we got to Ragnaros.
Yeah, Lily, that was the time Varanak slammed his head on his desk with his mic still active. He was so drunk and fell out of his chair.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
he came back laughing, and we asked him what happened, and all he did was laugh. And then he ended up getting threat on Ragnaros, died. We rezzed him. He then stood in the lava, died again, and then he just got up from his computer and he's like, "I'm dead," and went to bed. And he didn't log back in for the rest of the raid. He just was dead.
Yeah, it was great. Just you just suddenly hear.
Yeah,
Just no one
This
understood
sounded
what
like
was
somebody
going on.
just died. He just destroyed his head into his desk.
I'm not really a big drinker, but I have a don't drink and tank policy for any main raids. There was one BRD where I kind of learned the lesson. I think I had a few edibles, and this would have been when we were still in the 50s range. And we're on one of the bridges, and I was kind of alt-Z'd and looking at the awesome bridge over the lava flow, and you can see kind of the side of the city and BRD and how awesome that was. And I just double clicked my mouse and I ran off the edge into the lava and died. And I was like, yeah, you should probably be sober tanking stuff.
Have I ever? Well, I main tanked Firemaw for the first time a couple weeks ago. That's an interesting main tank fight. It's like none of the tanks brought fire assist. What do you got? Oh, I got an Oni cloak, I got an Oni neck, and I got some legs. It's like good enough. You're main tank. I was like, okay. There's some. One of the other things is just like the communities that develop on servers. Like there's the whole TA community, which I want to give a shout out to. They run early mornings during the weeks, which for a lot of the East Coast members, that's like a good time for them. Like in the Europeans, some of them too. It's not 9 a.m. server, so that's 12 our time. Able to fit some runs in on lunch breaks or in the afternoon. get the gear you want, still running soft reses throughout all of it. Like all these other guilds switching to GDKPs, making a bit of money, and because they don't need gear, but they've kept at it, and they're one of the few guilds I've seen consistently do that, and made a lot of friends that way, and made a lot of connections. There's names I see on ZG Island summoning to various places that I recognize. There's a awesome community in that. I really hope I was talking that entire time.
You
And,
were.
You were.
Okay.
I think we're coming to the end of stuff here, so
Yeah,
I
I'm
have
also
to get
very
going.
tired.
So
Yep.
I hope the stream enjoyed the story of creation, the highs and the lows, all the phases, all the gear, all the raids, all the bosses, all the moments.
From the grassy lands of Morgor to the dark portal, creation comes. Wait,
Good night, y'all.
Yeah, and you know, Tonka and I have this this little wager going on that our dungeon group's gonna beat your dungeon group, right?
it's gonna be so easy.
Lance Cousin is so determined to beat him that right now he's level 52 and he's confident enough that we're gonna beat you guys to 70. So we'll see. We'll see how that holds up.
Well, I'm just excited to be slamming through with all this Nax gear. I think it's going to be really
It's gonna
fun.
be awesome. It's gonna be so much fun to just absolutely destroy normal mode dungeons, like walking into RFC at 60. That's what I feel like it's gonna be like. Probably that's an extreme, but I'm really hyped to actually be overpowered for new content, and then
Like, this is kind of the fruits of our
still
labor, right?
grabbing blues and going, this feels really bad replacing this really cool looking piece of gear.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I'm hoping that we get plenty of people to 70 pretty quickly, and they enjoy it while they're doing it, and we get right back on killing stuff and coming back even harder than we were before.
Hell yeah. Thanks for having this conversation with me, fam, and leading the guild. It's been a pretty wild
Thanks for
ride.
the opportunity.
Hell yeah. I'll see you all in pre-patch.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, catch you guys later.
We're going to light 'em up. Ancestors watch over you, team.
And we can say that's a wrap. Hope you all enjoyed this story of creation. Put this on YouTube. You can see the raid chat for the YouTube VOD, but appreciate people in the chat as well. When are we getting Kiwi's staff? Probably tomorrow, maybe? Yeah, looking forward to BC. Classic has been an amazing journey. Ton of time, I would say, worth.
Burn. Who's that torn up in front of the boss? That's Brunt. That's Brunt.